A very good Monday morning to you. It is 7 o'clock coming up on today's programme. Donald Trump pushes the world a little closer to a global trade war.
Plus, a second Labour MP is apologising this morning for his past WhatsApp messages.
It's Monday, the 10th of February. Your headlines. Touching down in New Orleans for the Super Bowl, Donald Trump announced his plans for 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports.
Retaliatory tariffs from China take effect from today, with no sign of progress between the two countries.
Second MP is caught up in the Labour WhatsApp group row and deeply regrets the comments he made. We'll have the key moments from the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl victory over the Kansas City Chiefs, denying them what could be a historic win. Plus,
Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game?
Nobody pray for me. It been a day for me. Well, yeah.
Uncle Samuel Jackson and Kendrick Lamar and SZA add sparkle to the halftime show. We'll have the highlights. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us here on Sky News Breakfast this Monday morning. Well, Donald Trump has pushed the potential of a global trade war a little closer to happening this morning. A flurry of major announcements by the US president included plans for a new 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium entering the United States. He made the announcement while flying over the newly minted Gulf of America en route to sport's most star-studded evening. Mark Stone has this first report for us.
There is no bigger moment on the American cultural calendar. The Super Bowl is everything. And so, harnessing the moment, as he has every moment of the past few weeks here, Donald Trump in the stadium. He is so very intentionally the omnipresent president. But it was his journey here which generated the headlines. On Gaza, on tariffs, on Putin. Air Force One had brought him from his home in Florida and over the Gulf of Mexico, the perfect moment for the first headline.
This is a proclamation declaring today, February 9th, 2025, as the first ever Gulf of America Day.
And we're flying right over it right now. So we thought this would be appropriate.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please direct your attention out the right side of the aircraft. Air Force One is currently in international waters, for the first time in history, flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
A presidential order to rewrite the map. Then came an impromptu news conference and a flurry of real news.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about
Aluminum too.
10%?
No, 25%.
25 for both?
25 for both.
On Gaza, he doubled down, but this time claiming he'd buy it. It's not clear from who.
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it.
And on conversations with Russia's President Putin, he wouldn't be drawn on the detail or when conversations had taken place.
I know you don't want to tell us about your conversation with President Putin, but can you clarify whether you had that since you've been in office, or whether it happened before you became president?
I've had it. Let's just say I've had it. And I expect to have many more conversations.
Back at the star-studded game, it was the Philadelphia Eagles night. The president didn't stay for the end, back instead to the White House for another dramatic week of change.
The Eagles are Super Bowl champions for the second time.
For America and well beyond. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Let's get more on those tariffs with our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson. Nicole, before we get to that announcement made on Air Force One en route to the Super Bowl, just bring us up to speed on the state of play of these tit-for-tat tariff wars between the US and China.
Well, China's own tariffs on the United States come into effect today, and they're quite wide-ranging, but still targeted at the same time. So we're talking about 10 to 15% tariffs on crude oil, liquefied natural gas, coal, farm machinery, pickup trucks, some restrictions on the export of critical minerals. These are the minerals that are essential for the building blocks, really, of mobile phones and laptops, everything that we use, and also targeting a certain number of US companies like Google for antitrust investigations. So China does have levers to pull, and from today, it's showing the United States that it can play the tariff game too.
And in terms of this latest announcement from President Trump, while it's not targeted specifically at China, it's on a couple of commodities which will certainly affect them.
That's right, and not only China, but especially Japan, South Korea and Australia. So steel and aluminium, 25% tariff. And really, this is the first time from President Trump that we've seen these tariffs introduced across the board, not just targeting China, Mexico and Canada, which is what we had up until now. So we'll certainly be rattling those governments in Asia. They knew that eventually tariffs would come. Now they have. They'll have to try and work out how to respond. Countries like Australia have already said that they hope to get an exemption to do a deal. I'd say Japan will be looking for the same thing. And we've also been waiting for China to have a telephone conversation with President Trump. A few days ago, it was expected that President Trump and Xi Jinping would try and speak on the phone, perhaps stall off the introduction of these tariffs, but that phone call hasn't happened yet. President Trump said he's not in any hurry. President Xi Jinping has also been pretty busy on the diplomatic front here in China. So for now, the tariffs are going into effect, and we're still waiting to see if China will get any grand deal or grand bargain out of the United States. But it does appear as though this trade war is really beginning to heat up.
Nicole Johnson, as always, thanks so much. Let's bring you some of the day's other stories now. And police in Dublin are questioning a man in his 20s over the stabbing of 3 people. Officials say they responded to an incident in the Stony Batter area of the city at around 3 p.m. yesterday, describing it as an awful random attack. Israeli troops have withdrawn from the Netzarim corridor. It's a key strip of land separating northern Gaza from the south. The corridor has seen the passage of thousands of Palestinians moving back to their homes in northern Gaza since the ceasefire came into effect. The Church of England's General Synod will gather later for the first time since the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation last year. Justin Welby stood down following a damning report into the Church's handling of sexual abuse. It's hoped that a landmark plan being presented will help improve the way those types of allegations are handled in the future. Farmers will stage another round of protests in Westminster today, rallying against changes to inheritance tax rules. MPs will debate a petition with more than 148,000 signatures calling to keep the current tax exemptions for working farms. Now, a second Labour MP has admitted being in a WhatsApp group with the now sacked Health Minister Andrew Gwynn. Oliver Ryan said he deeply regrets the comments he made in the group. Well, our political correspondent Mari Rohr is here. Mari, just bring us up to speed, first of all, on what's been going on around first Gwynn and now Ryan.
So over the weekend, it emerged that Andrew Gwynn, who was a Labour health minister, had allegedly posted misogynistic, anti-Semitic, racist comments on this WhatsApp group. This WhatsApp group had himself as well as another Labour MP, which has now been revealed as Oliver Ryan, and also Labour officials as well. And allegedly he essentially kind of mocked up a response to a constituent asking about bin collections, essentially saying that they would be dead before the next election, made jokes about Diane Abbott at the dispatch box, made jokes about a Jewish academic saying they looked too Jewish, were they a member of Mossad, also joked about a constituent that was campaigning for more cycle lanes to saying that, you know, wish they'd be kind of mowed down in a cycle lane. So some of these alleged comments are pretty horrendous for someone who's elected to represent those constituents. And so that's what happened over the weekend. He was sacked as a minister and the whip was withdrawn, so he was suspended from the Labour Party. And then what happened last night was Oliver Ryan, another Labour MP that was in that WhatsApp group, he has now apologised. He's apologised for, first of all, not saying or kind of speaking up, as it were, about Andrew Gwynn's comments, saying that essentially not doing so was wrong, but also he's apologised for some comments that he's made in that WhatsApp group himself, and that he wouldn't make those comments today, he says. And the question will be, will the Labour whip be withdrawn from him or not? Well, government sources told us Oliver Ryan's remarks were unacceptable and deeply disappointing. While a Labour Party investigation is already underway, the Chief Whip will also be speaking to him and no action is off the table. So the question will be, once they've started to establish some of the facts, will they suspend the whip from Oliver Ryan? And if they don't, they'll have to explain why not, because there will be a lot of pressure on them to do so. There's also questions around anyone else in that WhatsApp group representing the Labour Party and what the sanctions or repercussions for them might be as well. The government are saying Starmer has acted incredibly quickly to get rid of Andrew Gwynn, and he will do the same with anyone else when it's necessary, when it comes to kind of horrific language or abusive language and behaviour as well.
Meanwhile, the government wants us to focus on a sort of new area that they're trying to tackle within the whole debate around migration.
Exactly. So really, there's this big push this week about immigration, and this is because in Labour circles, they feel that they're not necessarily getting the credit for some of the work they've been doing around deporting people and kind of cracking down on illegal migrants working illegally in the UK. And so really, they want to actually shout about some of the work they're doing and show the public. And what they're trying to almost do is, rather than talk about what they're doing and talk about how effective they're being, actually show it. So they've kind of released some data this morning, and they said that more than 600 arrests were made just in January this year alone, 73% up from January last year under the Conservatives, according to their data. And what they're saying is over 16,000 people have actually been deported since they've won the election. So they're trying to show that these numbers are actually really quite large and they are being effective at trying to get people out. They've been raiding businesses, restaurants, cafes, vape shops, nail bars, those kinds of things. And Yvette Cooper has been speaking to the media, and she said for far too long employers have been able to take on and exploit illegal migrants, and too many people have been able to arrive and work illegally here in the UK. And what the government and the Home Office specifically are arguing is that it is creating a pull factor for people to cross the channel in small boats if they think they can get work here, even if it's illegal, cash in hand, if they think they can get work here. It's also abuse of the fact that these migrants are vulnerable, they don't have rights because they're not legally here and so they can't be protected, but also it's an abuse of the immigration system and it's abuse of the UK economy, because obviously illegal working affects the economy as well. So what they're trying to say is they've got this holistic approach and they are taking action and they want the public to notice.
Well, we will be talking to Angela Eager, the Border Security and Asylum Minister, in just a moment about that, so we'll dive into it in a bit more detail. But for now, let's take you through some of the highlights from the Super Bowl last night, where Philadelphia Eagles claimed victory over the Kansas City Chiefs by 40-22.
So
well, Donald Trump became the first sitting US president to attend a Super Bowl. He was accompanied by a large entourage, including his daughter Ivanka, and was greeted with cheers and largely a warm response. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift, of course, who's the girlfriend of Kansas City Chiefs Travis Kelce, received a different welcome and was largely booed by Eagles fans when she was spotted on, well, I'm being told to say not the big screen here, the Jumbotron. Apparently that's what that's called. With the eyes there as well, as you can see. Meanwhile, actor Samuel L. Jackson made an appearance during the halftime show, dressed as Uncle Samuel Jackson, to introduce rapper Kendrick Lamar.
Oh no! Too loud, too reckless, too ghetto. Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game? Then tighten up!
Nobody pray for me. It been a day for me. Well, yeah. Hey, I remember syrup sandwiches and crime allowances. Vanessa known with some counterfeit.
Well, the rapper took centre stage for this year's Super Bowl halftime show as the Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs, of course, headed to their locker rooms at half times. Lamar also brought out singer and songwriter SZA as a special guest in the middle. It's always quite the show, that. And congratulations again to the Eagles. I mean, who better named today to join us from the government than Angela Eagle? I mean, great timing.
Eagles have done very well.
Are you a fan of the Eagles?
Eagles have done very well. I'm a fan of every Eagle that there is.
Well, this is a great twist of fate to have you with us. It would have been either way, whoever won, the Chiefs or the Eagles.
Of course.
Well, you're also the Chief of Border Security and Asylum as well. So,
I do that.
So we're well covered. Well, anyway, very good morning to you.
Thank you.
What is the reason, in particular today, you want to talk about a sort of subsector that you're clamping down on in terms of the fight against illegal immigration?
Well, we see the fight against illegal immigration across the board. So disrupting the gangs, which is what the Border Security Bill second reading is going to be about in Parliament this afternoon, but also to say to people you cannot come over to the UK and work illegally without there being consequences, which is why we're talking about the intensification of labour market action to prevent this kind of exploitation. Today, we've just had the best January since 2019 with a 73% increase in arrests and a 48% increase in raids on those sectors of the economy where we think illegal workers are.
So I mean, I saw the percentage increase, as you said, a great increase in terms of the number of arrests of people working illegally. But in terms of the actual numbers, you're talking about hundreds still versus, of course, the illegal crossings, which is in the hundreds of thousands potentially each year. Do you think specifically making more of these arrests will lead to lower small boat crossings?
We know, for example, that the criminal gangs who've been allowed to take hold along our borders and have a very sophisticated business model, which is very lucrative, do advertise in places for people to come over and pay the money. And part of the advertising is that they'll be able to work in the UK easily. And what we're saying is, no, you won't be able to work illegally in the UK easily. If you're found, you will be arrested and deported. And of course, we're also taking action against those employers who are cheating by employing illegal workers, paying them very, very low wages and often leaving them in squalid conditions. So there's fines. Those who are found doing this can be disqualified from being directors. So enforcement of the rules matters.
I'm interested you say arrested and deported. So that is, if you're illegally working, do all the powers exist already to immediately deport? Where are you going to deport them to specifically?
Well, it depends where they're from. You can't deport them willy-nilly. You've got to find out where they're from and deport them back to where they came from.
And if someone has gone as far as taking a job illegally, do they have the same protections that an asylum seeker arriving on the first day would potentially have?
Well, if you arrive and you claim asylum, then there's a process to see whether you are entitled to protection. That's what we've been doing with starting up processing, because Conservatives stopped processing completely and just left 100,000 odd people stuck in the system, not processing them. So we've started up the processing for asylum claims. But the issue is that if you're waiting for that to be done, you cannot work. And if anyone is found working, then that will certainly be taken account of as part of any asylum claim they might make.
And what portion of small boat crossings does this account for, do you think?
Well, when we come across people in the labour market, if they're here illegally, we know about it. They don't always tell us how they got across. So the issue is that we're cracking down on those who arrive illegally and think they can work illegally. Often it's a trap and it's very exploitative, and they've been sold a dream that isn't true. So it's important that we crack down on that kind of exploitation and get the message out there that it is not easy to live and work illegally in the UK.
What about the punishment for the employers?
Well, they can be fined up to £60,000 per person that they've employed illegally. They can have up to 5 years in jail if they're found to be doing this, and they can be disqualified from being a director of any company.
I wanted to switch focus and talk about Andrew Gwynn and Paul Ryan. What's the update specifically on Paul Ryan?
Well, he's apologised, my understanding is, for some of these comments in a WhatsApp group that goes back years, apparently. I think my understanding is that the Chief Whip will be seeing him today. There's an ongoing investigation into the entirety of that WhatsApp group. Andrew Gwynn has been administratively suspended. That kind of comments are not acceptable. So the Prime Minister has taken a very strong stance straight away on all of this as soon as it came to light.
What's your understanding as an MP as to what the bar is for potentially having to not just apologise but maybe lose the whip? Is failure to speak up when somebody else says something offensive enough to disqualify you from deserving the whip, or is it only if you've said something bad yourself?
I mean, I think that's a matter for the Chief Whip to decide when he talks to the MP in question today. And I think also the investigation will be about context, will be about who said what when. And that will give the individuals the chance to explain themselves. Both of them have apologised. And
your personal view towards all of this? I mean, of course, some of the comments that we've allegedly read, that have been alleged to have been said, are just appalling, and
Yes.
obviously the actions against Andrew Gwynn are more severe than thus far against Paul Ryan. But we can also get into a place where if somebody else has said something, you can't punish everybody for that. And I guess it's just a kind of how far things should go on this.
I think that's why context is important, and that's why we need to wait to see what the investigation says. I haven't seen, you know, the context in this group, and that's for those that are investigating in the party, and those, and also the Chief Whip. But I note that the MP in question has apologised profusely this morning.
Of course, it's Oliver Ryan, not Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the US. I got that confused. Just finally wanted to ask you about this AI summit taking part in Paris today. President Macron, to his credit, has attracted quite an extraordinary guest list and seemingly a huge amount of investment. Is that a worry for us in the UK?
Well, I don't think we should always see investment in other countries as a problem for us. We're doing our own attempts to get investment in the UK. We all know that AI is going to be a driver of new jobs and new technologies, and it's important that all democratic countries get on the top of what this technology is and see how it can be used for good.
And then just finally, President Trump en route to the Super Bowl last night announcing his latest set of tariffs. This time it's 25% on steel and aluminium. Again, not really something that's going to affect the UK?
Well, look, I mean, we have a very balanced trading relationship with the UK. I think 300 billion pounds worth of trade between our countries. And I think it's in the best interests of both of us as long-standing allies and neighbours that we carry on with that balanced trade. We'll have to wait and see whether the President gets more specific about what he meant by that comment on the way to the Super Bowl.
Do you think so far, though, we might have avoided getting these tariffs by luck rather than by design?
Well, we'll have to wait until the import of what the President said on his way to the Super Bowl actually becomes clearer. But I would say that we have a lot of mutual investment in each other's economies, trillions of dollars worth of investment, and I think it's in both our interests as trading countries and economies to keep our relationship as close as possible.
Angela Eagle, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Right, so to come here on the Breakfast Show, lots more to come. We'll be later on talking about Beijing and whether Beijing can continue its trade war with the US and avoid further escalation. We'll also be talking about the government's plans for AI. We'll be right back.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water, and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away? Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. Reminder of our top stories this morning. US President Donald Trump has announced a new tariff of 25% on all steel and aluminium imports into the United States, signalling another major escalation in his global trade war. A second Labour MP says he deeply regrets comments made on a WhatsApp group with the now sacked Health Minister Andrew Gwynn. Oliver Ryan is being investigated by the Labour Party. The Home Office has clamped down on illegal migrants working in the UK, with almost 4,000 arrests in the past 6 months. It's part of a drive to stop smuggling gangs promoting fake jobs in the UK. Well, Donald Trump has pushed the potential of a global trade war a little closer this morning. A flurry of major announcements by the US president included plans for a new 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium entering the United States. He made the announcement while flying over the newly minted Gulf of America, en route to sport's most star-studded evening. Mark Stone has this report.
There is no bigger moment on the American cultural calendar. The Super Bowl is everything. And so, harnessing the moment, as he has every moment of the past few weeks here, Donald Trump in the stadium. He is so very intentionally the omnipresent president. But it was his journey here which generated the headlines. On Gaza, on tariffs, on Putin. Air Force One had brought him from his home in Florida and over the Gulf of Mexico, the perfect moment for the first headline.
This is a proclamation declaring today, February 9th, 2025, as the first ever Gulf of America Day.
And we're flying right over it right now. So we thought this would be appropriate.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please direct your attention out the right side of the aircraft. Air Force One is currently in international waters, for the first time in history, flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
A presidential order to rewrite the map. Then came an impromptu news conference and a flurry of real news.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum?
Aluminum too.
10%?
No, 25%.
25 for both.
25 for both.
On Gaza, he doubled down, but this time claiming he'd buy it. It's not clear from who.
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it.
And on conversations with Russia's President Putin, he wouldn't be drawn on the detail or when conversations had taken place.
I know you don't want to tell us about your conversation with President Putin, but can you clarify whether you had that since you've been in office, or whether it happened before you became president?
I've had it. Let's just say I've had it. And I expect to have many more conversations.
Back at the star-studded game, it was the Philadelphia Eagles night. The president didn't stay for the end, back instead to the White House for another dramatic week of change.
The Eagles are Super Bowl champions for the second time.
For America and well beyond. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Let's get more now on all of this with our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson. Nicole, of course, this isn't specifically this latest announcement on steel and aluminium targeted at China, but it will be felt by them and other countries in the region.
That's right. China isn't a major export of steel and aluminium to the United States, but Japan, South Korea and Australia are. So they will be scrambling now for a response. Australia has already said that it wants to try and get a tariff or a trade exemption. It thinks that it can do a deal. The Japanese Prime Minister, he has been in the US just in the last few days meeting with President Trump. So everyone is trying to work out how they can come to some sort of arrangement to try and avoid it. But it goes to show that when it comes to these Trump tariffs, no one is exempt. This is the first time that he has expanded the tariffs beyond China, Canada and Mexico. So Asia knows that it is also in the sights of President Trump, along with the European Union.
Nicole, great stuff. Thanks so much for that summary. Well, let's discuss this further with the Professor of Economics at Cambridge University, Meredith Crowley. Very good morning to you, Professor. Thanks for joining us. I mean, we'd sort of scheduled this interview based on the fact that China's response to the initial extra 10% tariffs on China from the US was coming into effect today. But obviously there's another detail to be discussing overnight. What is your assessment of this latest salvo from President Trump talking about steel and aluminium?
Well, steel has been a problem for the U.S. for a long time. And going back to 2001, President George W. Bush tried to put on major steel import restrictions. And what happened back then, which is likely what's going to happen now, this steel tariff will go on against everything. And then the first step will be everybody who imports something in the U.S. that can't be produced in the U.S. is then going to get an exemption. So things like surgical steel knives or scalpels for performing surgery, all kinds of specific, very technical steel might only be made in, say, the UK or Germany, and so or Japan. Those products will probably be exempted right away. The longer run game of what the president is after, obviously, the U.S. put tons of restrictions on imports from China. And then what eventually happened 2 years down the road are the things that were restricted from China started to enter the U.S. through Mexico, maybe being produced in Vietnam, then expanded and further refined in Mexico before ultimately making its way into the U.S. So by putting a global steel safeguard on, he prevents any of that kind of circumvention or rerouting of trade through other markets. The second step, it seems that President Trump likes to link issues that aren't previously linked in economic policy. So probably there's something he wants from Japan that has nothing to do with steel. And if they're willing to concede and meet his demands, he'll probably either reduce or eliminate the tariff on steel from Japan, similarly from the UK or Germany, the European Union. It'll probably roll out. It's going to be confusing. I think one of the things the president thrives on is by keeping his exact thinking unclear, he leaves the other party really off balance, and it makes it hard for them to figure out what can they do. The risk would be that they offer more than they would have if he'd been very clear and transparent about what his ultimate objective was.
How resolute do you think he is? I mean, in his first term, we saw him talk very tough on trade and then back down on certain moments in time. Obviously, he's given Canada and Mexico a 30-day reprieve, but then this latest announcement will, in fact, affect Canada quite a lot if it's this commodity-specific route.
Yes, that will affect Canada tremendously. And the question is, what does he really want from the other party? I think just going back to what happened in 2018 in the aftermath of the first trade war, imports from China on impact fell 30%. So a third of stuff we were importing from China basically dried up. But then prices increased for importers and distributors of stuff, but they didn't really make it all the way to the consumers until at quite a delay. So in the first 2 years, we didn't really see the price increase passing through to consumers because people higher up just absorbed that cost of the new tax into their profit margin. Now, what he sees is, the increase in price really hit during the Biden administration. But from the president's perspective, domestic, U.S. consumers weren't that angry about the tariffs on China. So where economists were telling him this is going to be costly, and it has been in terms of pushing prices up, it wasn't that costly to him. And the cost came in very slowly. So from that perspective, he's going to say, well, 25% will push up prices for Americans, but they can hack it. That'll be fine. And so what I think he probably is going to be much more aggressive. My expectation is he can be much more aggressive and much more resolute. He was saying some things like, along with the steel increase, he's now announced what he calls reciprocal tariffs. So to be clear, what that means is currently the import tariff on autos into the U.S. is 2.5%, which is pretty low. It's basically zero. But the import tariff to import a car into the European Union is 10%. So when he says he wants a reciprocal tariff, it means for the European Union and for the UK as well, he's going to jack that tariff on cars up to 10%. And so in this way, he's basically going to look at what tariffs other countries are charging, and he's going to raise them. And the thing is, the U.S. really does have the lowest tariffs in the world, across the board. So the U.S. can go up without really, too much fear that the other party is going to say, oh, it's a good idea for us to raise our tariffs. So I think his resolution will be pretty strong.
It's so interesting because, whether it's a country-specific approach from which the UK has been excluded thus far, or a sort of product or commodity-specific, you mentioned cars there, steel, aluminium. We don't export much of those things to the United States. So how is this likely, if the UK doesn't get a country-specific one, which I imagine is still most people's base case expectation, how will this all affect the UK?
So the UK does export cars directly to the US, but the other thing the UK does is it makes parts for things like for cars, first of all, but also for airplanes. And so those parts enter into the U.S. supply chain, sometimes via Europe. So there's going to be spillover effects, even if the UK, because they're such a close military partner of the U.S., escapes tariffs entirely. The U.S., if they raise the tariff on the European Union, parts that the UK sells to the European Union that then make it their way into the U.S. are going to be impacted.
But is it going to be a game-changing factor for the UK economy? Are there any benefits in the way that perhaps they're not getting any country-specific tariffs?
I think the risk right now is the whole world economy is changing, and so it's not just one individual tariff, but what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to sort of cut the world into two spheres, a sort of Western, an American sphere and then a China sphere. And so, in the long run, he might try to keep tighter economic relations with other democracies. But as he splits the world, it's going to become very costly for businesses everywhere. If they want to supply the US market, they're going to have clean supply chains all the way backward that don't link into China. This seems like the direction he's going in. He hasn't said that exactly. But so if that happens, it's going to make it costly for businesses everywhere to source parts, because they're going to have to think about what kind of compliance do they need to satisfy in order to ship things to different locations.
Professor Crowley, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, today marks the start of HIV testing week, and there are calls by campaigners to find almost 5,000 people unknowingly living with the virus. Well, earlier I spoke to the chief executive of the Terence Higgins Trust, Richard Angel, about how HIV tests are now much easier to do and not as invasive.
It's about 110,000 people in the UK living with HIV, but 4,700 in England, 5,200 UK-wide, are living with HIV and don't know it. They haven't been diagnosed yet, and they need a HIV test. And that's why testing week is happening this week.
And HIV testing, I mean, it was really interesting reading into this, is actually relatively simple, or certainly a lot simpler than people might expect.
So quick and easy. You can do a simple finger prick test and get a result in 15 minutes. You can do an oral swab and get a result in 20 minutes. And if you go to a sexual health clinic, they'll give you a result pretty damn quick.
And it's really interesting to hear the numbers of people that you say are in total living with the disease across the UK. And what is their life like? I mean, is it manageable now, that the advances in the last decade or two?
Living with HIV is so much different to how lots of people might assume or would have thought if they last checked in on this story in the 90s or the 80s. People living with HIV today get moved on to treatment almost straight away on their diagnosis. That means that within weeks of being diagnosed, the virus is no longer attacking your immune system. And if you have sex or have a baby, you cannot pass on the virus. So it is a world away from where it was, and people will have a normal life expectancy. In fact, some people think it'd be longer because you see a doctor so often.
And I guess when I'm so interested in this, when did the massive step forward, the massive advance sort of happen? When did it change that?
We've had a couple through the years. So at the late 80s, a test became available. In the late 90s, treatment became effective. And then in 2018, the science was categoric that if you're taking your medication, you cannot pass on the virus. And they did a survey, 2 million acts of condomless sex, and not one transfer for a partner living with HIV taking the medication to one that wasn't.
And in terms of the testing, I mean, it clearly, as you've explained, it's so easy to do, and yet there are these 5,000 or so people living with it without having had the test. Have we always been a little bit behind on the testing? Was testing better? Has it dipped? Just talk me through the sort of factors there.
The testing technology is at absolute best at the moment, and it is available in more places than possible. So you can go to any sexual health clinic across the country. This week, it's free for anyone across the UK to get a HIV test. In England, that's normally a rarity. Scotland and Wales, the tests are always on, but in England, it's just this week. But we've now got the Prime Minister committing £27 million from last World AIDS Day so that 90 A&Es will automatically test people if you turn up in A&E. And that's starting to find huge numbers of people.
And the Prime Minister had a test himself?
He's done a test himself in his house. We were there with him as he had a test with Beverly Knight, one of our patrons, and he showed how easy it is to do and how simple it is. And it arrives in your home in a confidential envelope. It's free all this week if you book them today. And he did that test and showed what that meant and became the first global leader to have a HIV test.
And presumably, I mean, I might be wrong on this, but presumably the message isn't to tell everyone across the country to go and have a test, or is it? I mean, what might those 5,000 or so people be experiencing that would be a factor that you'd suggest means go and have a test?
It's always best to know your status. Lots of people, when they acquire HIV, don't really have any symptoms at all. It wouldn't be until it was undiagnosed for many years that they might present. So if you've had sex without a condom or the condom has failed at some point, it might be a good idea to have a HIV test and to make sure you know your status.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, will government plans to become an AI superpower suffer from high energy prices and a lack of infrastructure? We'll discuss.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest 'Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
High energy prices could threaten the UK's status as a world leader in AI, as energy for data centres can't keep up with AI ambitions. That's coming from a report from the Social Market Foundation, which says energy costs and planning issues are holding back the supply of data centres needed to power the UK's AI growth ambitions. Well, Theo Bertram, Director of the Social Market Foundation, is here with me. Very good morning to you, Theo.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. So just snapshot for us, first of all. AI is a very data-hungry technology, which itself is enormously energy-hungry.
That's right. So actually we're doing great as a country in AI. We rank 4th in the world, but we have an Achilles heel, and that's infrastructure. So AI depends on data centres, and data centres are the engine of AI. And although we currently lead Europe on data centres, we're growing too slowly.
And what are the sort of the hurdles we need to get over to change that?
Well, the biggest hurdle is simply the industrial cost of electricity in this country. It's about 4 times cheaper to build a data centre in the US because of the cost of electricity. So that is our big hurdle, that and planning.
In terms of how much energy is used by AI, is that coming down a lot as innovation improves, as is always the case with these sorts of things? Is it likely to come down more, or break that down for me?
Well, the answer is both. So the actual cost of any one bit of AI work is coming down, but all of us, we're all using AI more and more. So the overall amount of energy being consumed by AI is going to go up. Some say it will be 2 times more, sometimes it's 6 times more, sometimes 10 times more. But everyone agrees it's going to go up.
And in terms of the sort of planning point you said, is that just to build the data centres, or you're talking about to build power stations or wind farms or improving the energy grid to then power the data centre?
It's both. So we think a key part of this is, at the moment, we have an excess of supply of energy in not Scotland and the north. You wouldn't believe it, but we actually generate electricity there that we switch off and don't use.
Ever?
We just simply, and we even pay the companies not to use it. And so what we're saying is you need to have what's called zonal or locational pricing, the idea that you could lower the cost in Scotland and the north to attract the people that want to consume that data to those places. So if you had those sort of, not all data centres will want to be in Scotland, but some of them may locate there if you were to lower the cost of that electricity. And what we know is you've got the wind there to supply them.
And so renewable energy is a good source of energy for data centres? Presumably data centres need energy 24/7.
Yeah, but what they want is reliable, secure and clean energy. Now, they can get that in places where we've got wind farms and where we've got that sort of clean generation. But at the moment, where they're motivated to locate is around London and the southeast. So we need to find a way to incentivise them to go north to where the energy is.
So let's talk about this sort of dynamic pricing model. I mean, how likely is that in a relatively small country like ours? Is it something that you think would take a sort of act of God to push through with politicians? I mean, there's been a huge pushback in the south if people are paying higher energy prices to a different region.
Well, we definitely think there needs to be change. If we have the status quo, what we have at the moment is very high energy prices everywhere, whereas if we can lower that price in Scotland and the north, then we think we'll see demand shift there. Now, the advantage of seeing some of that demand shift is that actually it may have a positive impact on the southeast as well. If what we're seeing is instead of everyone competing in the same place, if we can pull some of those energy consumers to the north and to Scotland, that will help. And we also want to rebalance the country. And yet there will be some tough choices, and there will be some companies that can't move and will therefore need to be paying more. But at the moment, what's going to happen is everyone is going to keep, the demand is going to go much further than supply, and that means the prices will keep rising. So we've got to do something to try and address that.
And in terms of the sort of supply of energy and the source of that, it's interesting to hear you, who sounds like a sort of clear capitalist on this and wanting dynamic pricing and wanting to see a greater supply overall. You celebrate the use of wind in this. Would you also celebrate more licences for oil and gas and a greater supply of gas power station or not?
We're in favour of more clean, renewable energy. The problem that we have at the moment is we're switching that off in Scotland. So actually, locational pricing will make those data centres consume more clean energy, because at the moment they're all competing in the southeast where we don't have as much renewable energy. And so that's where we're seeing AI. If we continue that way, AI will consume less clean energy than with locational pricing.
Today, President Macron's hosting an AI summit in Paris. Is that something that is a worry for the British AI community in terms of attracting foreign investment? Is he doing well at that, President Macron?
Well, I work for a tech company, and I remember literally Macron laid out the red carpet for us to go and meet them, and they are desperate to pull AI companies away from the UK and come and locate in Paris. But at the moment, we're holding on to those tech companies. Why? Because we have the talent, we have the universities, and we have great startups here, better than anyone else in Europe. But the problem is our infrastructure, and Macron knows that.
And do you think he's onto something there? How close are we to ceding that advantage that we have?
Well, at the moment, we have more data centres, more compute power, as it's known, than anyone else in Europe. But both Paris and Frankfurt are moving faster and ahead of us. So if nothing changes, they will overtake us. And if you don't have the compute power, if you can't do the work itself, we will start to lose that talent.
You mentioned we're third or fourth globally. I mean, obviously, the US and China are in front. How far behind are us as third or fourth place? I mean, are they just leagues and leagues ahead?
Yeah. I mean, they are vastly far ahead, but that doesn't mean that there aren't crucial parts of the market that we can corner. And interestingly, when you look at how we're doing at university, when it comes to PhD level, we really are the champions of the world. So we've got great institutions in this country, and we should be championing those higher education institutions. Those companies that are in China and the US, they want our talent, they want our startups.
Theo Bertram, thanks so much for joining us. Very interesting.
Thank you.
All right, let's get more on the Labour WhatsApp group scandal. Earlier, I asked the Home Office Minister, Angela Eagle, what the bar was for a minister to lose the whip.
I think that's a matter for the Chief Whip to decide when he talks to the MP in question today. And I think also the investigation will be about context, will be about who said what when, and that will give the individuals the chance to explain themselves. Both of them have apologised. Context is important, and that's why we need to wait to see what the investigation says. I haven't seen the context in this group, and that's for those that are investigating in the party, and those, and also the Chief Whip. But I note that the MP in question has apologised profusely this morning.
Mari's here with me to discuss this. Mari, weigh up the sort of balancing forces here. Is the Prime Minister acting quickly here? Is it fair for the second MP to wait for more of this investigation, or is this sort of quite a lot of pressure building on the PM more broadly?
Well, I think when it comes to Andrew Gwynn, he did act relatively quickly. The fact that, we woke up this morning and already it was kind of dealt with. He'd been sacked, he'd been suspended from the party, and that's what they really want to show. They're trying to show that, yes, there may be these difficulties or these scandals or whatever that may crop up, as they do in politics, but what they're trying to show is they are different from the Tories because they are dealing with it quicker. That is the argument that Angela Eagle was just making to you in that interview that she did with you earlier. However, there are still questions around not just Oliver Ryan, the other MP who has been named and was in that WhatsApp group, around whether he is or not going to keep the whip. He's having a meeting with the Chief Whip today, and we'll have to see what the outcome of that is, but also whether there'll be any sanctions or repercussions for anyone else in that WhatsApp group. I think there are allegedly Labour councillors in that WhatsApp group, for instance, and so I think it reflects on the Labour Party if Starmer isn't tough on them. Doesn't mean he won't be, but we'll have to see exactly what kind of action he takes.
We shall see, and we'll also be getting a response from the Tories at 8:15, speaking to Nigel Huddleston, their co-chair. Mari, thank you so much for that. Well, we're going to take a very quick break. Mari and I will be back in just a couple of minutes with all day's news.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here? You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Very good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock. On today's programme, Donald Trump pushes the world a little closer to a global trade war.
Plus, a second Labour MP is apologising this morning for his past WhatsApp messages.
It's Monday, the 10th of February. Your headlines. Touching down in New Orleans for the Super Bowl, Donald Trump announces plans for a 25% tariff on steel and aluminium imports.
Retaliatory tariffs from China take effect from today, with no sign of progress being made between the two countries.
A second MP is caught up in the Labour WhatsApp group row and deeply regrets the comments he made. One of the key moments from the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl victory over the Kansas City Chiefs, denying them what would be a historic win. Plus,
Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game?
Nobody pray for me. It been a day for me.
Kendrick Lamar, Scissor, and Uncle Samuel L. Jackson add sparkle to the halftime show. We'll have the highlights. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us here on Sky News Breakfast. Well, Donald Trump has pushed the potential of a global trade war a little closer this morning. A flurry of major announcements by the US president included plans for a new 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium entering the United States. He made the announcement while flying over the newly minted Gulf of America en route to sports' most star-studded evening. Mark Stone has his first report.
There is no bigger moment on the American cultural calendar. The Super Bowl is everything. And so, harnessing the moment, as he has every moment of the past few weeks here, Donald Trump in the stadium. He is so very intentionally the omnipresent president. But it was his journey here which generated the headlines. On Gaza, on tariffs, on Putin. Air Force One had brought him from his home in Florida and over the Gulf of Mexico, the perfect moment for the first headline.
This is a proclamation declaring today, February 9th, 2025, as the first ever Gulf of America Day.
And we're flying right over it right now, so we thought this would be appropriate.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please direct your attention out the right side of the aircraft. Air Force One is currently in international waters, for the first time in history, flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
A presidential order to rewrite the map. Then came an impromptu news conference and a flurry of real news.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum?
Aluminum too.
10%?
No, 25%.
25 for both.
25 for both.
On Gaza, he doubled down, but this time claiming he'd buy it. It's not clear from who.
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it.
And on conversations with Russia's President Putin, he wouldn't be drawn on the detail or when conversations had taken place.
I know you don't want to tell us about your conversation with President Putin, but can you clarify whether you had that since you've been in office, or whether it happened before you became president?
I've had it. Let's just say I've had it. And I expect to have many more conversations.
Back at the star-studded game, it was the Philadelphia Eagles night. The president didn't stay for the end, back instead to the White House for another dramatic week of change.
The Eagles are Super Bowl champions for the second time.
For America and well beyond. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Well, we've got a little bit of breaking news on that announcement from President Trump last night. The EU Commission has said it sees no justification for the imposition of tariffs on its exports. It said it hasn't yet received details of the tariffs from the Trump administration and would not respond to broad announcements, but did say the imposition of tariffs would be unlawful and economically unproductive. That's coming out of the EU Commission in the last few moments. Well, let's get more from our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson. Nicole, How's this all going down stateside? Is China and its neighbours a little bit more prepared for this sort of announcement now, or not?
I would say that China is prepared. It had been expecting announcements like this. It has been trying to gear up its exports to deal with it. It has been exporting as much as it could ahead of the imposition of tariffs. We just heard from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in China, and they have reiterated the line that they've been very consistent about over the last few weeks, which is that nobody wins with a tariff war. They're pushing back. They say that they want communication, they want open dialogue, they're opposed to any form of protectionism, but also China's neighbours, big steel exporting countries like Australia, South Korea, Vietnam, they will all be scrambling now, trying to work out how to respond, to get on the phone with Trump's people and see if they can do their own separate deal. And that's what we're going to see across this region, countries acting in their own interest to see if they can find a way around it. And President Trump knows that that is what's coming. He has put them all on edge.
And in terms, Nicole, of the likely ongoing reaction, the sort of first extra 10% of tariffs that was imposed on China did lead to a response from China. Are they going to go tit for tat on this latest salvo from President Trump, do we expect?
I would expect that they will. It certainly seems as though China's not going to sit back and take it. They've made it very clear that they have levers to pull, whether it's restricting access to critical minerals, imposing tariffs on certain targeted imports from the United States, like liquefied natural gas or crude oil. So China is certainly showing that it will respond. But what's interesting, though, Wilf, is they could also find a diplomatic opening. This allows China to present to the world that it is a stable, predictable trading partner, and that is the message that China wants to get through to those countries in the global south, those developing countries who will now be looking at their relationship, their economic relationship with the United States, and thinking, perhaps we can't trust the United States. Things change very quickly. A new tariff could be introduced overnight, and that gives China an opening to try and strengthen those relationships. And I think that is something that the government here in Beijing will be working at and looking at very closely over the coming weeks and months.
Nicole Johnson, thanks so much. Let's have a look at some other stories making headlines this morning. Police in Dublin are questioning a man in his 20s over the stabbing of 3 people. Officials say they responded to an incident in the Stoneybatter area of the city at around 3 p.m. yesterday, describing it as an awful random attack. Israeli troops have withdrawn from the Netzarim corridor, a key strip of land separating northern Gaza from the south. The corridor has seen the passage of thousands of Palestinians moving back to their homes in northern Gaza since the ceasefire came into effect. The Church of England's General Synod will gather later for the first time since the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation last year. Justin Welby stood down following a damning report into the Church's handling of a sexual abuse scandal. It's hoped a landmark plan being presented will help improve the way those types of allegations are handled in the future. A second Labour MP has admitted being in a WhatsApp group with the now sacked Health Minister Andrew Gwynn. Oliver Ryan said he deeply regrets the comments made in the group, and our political correspondent Mari Roy is here with some more of the details, Mari, both on the Andrew Gwynn aspect and now this extra accusations towards Oliver Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. So Andrew Gwynn, Health Minister until very recently. He was also very kind of influential and important in Jeremy Corbyn in terms of kind of being a campaign chief for him. So he's a well-known name in Labour circles, let's say. Now, he's been accused of posting racist, anti-Semitic, misogynistic messages on this WhatsApp group, some about, constituents of his. And so he was sacked over the weekend because of that. And he was also suspended from the Labour Party. And then the new details that emerged overnight is that Oliver Ryan, who is a much newer MP, who was a councillor before then, he was also in that WhatsApp group. And he was kind of essentially witnessing some of it and didn't speak up, didn't say anything, and he's basically come out, apologised on social media, said he should have spoken out, he should have said something, but he's also apologised for some comments that he made as well, that he said he wouldn't make now, and he deeply regrets them. So some of the comments are mainly kind of the most offensive comments, I would say, that have been reported are more from Andrew Gwynn, but nonetheless, Oliver Ryan, some of the comments that are allegedly have been said in this WhatsApp group are also quite offensive. And so both of these MPs are in big trouble. The question really for Oliver Ryan is, will he lose the Labour whip? Or will he find a way to kind of keep that, and how will that reflect on Keir Starmer as leader, and how will that reflect on the Labour Party as well? A government source has told us this morning Oliver Ryan's remarks were unacceptable and deeply disappointing. While a Labour Party investigation is already underway, the Chief Whip will also be speaking to him, and no action is off the table. You were speaking to Angela Eagle this morning, who was saying he's going to have a meeting with the Chief Whip today. And also you were asking her really about this kind of possibility of sanctions and what she believes is the right choice when it comes to Oliver Ryan.
I think that's a matter for the Chief Whip to decide when he talks to the MP in question today. And I think also the investigation will be about context, will be about who said what when. And that will give the individuals the chance to explain themselves. Both of them have apologised. Context is important, and that's why we need to wait to see what the investigation says. I haven't seen, you know, the context in this group, and that's for those that are investigating in the party, and those, and also the Chief Whip. But I note that the MP in question has apologised profusely this morning.
Now, Murray, we're, of course, also talking to Angela Eagle about the arrests that they're trumpeting, I guess, about people working illegally here.
Yeah, exactly that. So the Home Office are really trying to use this week to kind of grab hold of the news agenda and show off, really, the kind of work that they're doing around deportations and around cracking down on illegal work. And so Angela Eagle's kind of on the broadcast rounds this morning to show how much better they are at doing this than the Conservatives were. So they're saying, you know, in January 2025, more than 600 people were arrested, 600 arrests were made. They're saying that's a 73% increase from January last year under the Conservatives, and also that over 16,000 people have been deported since they came to power. They've been raiding businesses like cafes, nail bars, vape shops, restaurants, those kinds of things. And Yvette Cooper's basically been saying that actually it's been too easy for people to come here illegally and work illegally, and this needs to end now. What European countries have been saying in the past is that the UK is seen as a bit of a soft touch when it comes to illegally working, which therefore incentivises them to make that journey, not just across Europe, but then also across the Channel, which is incentivising and potentially increasing the number of people coming over in small boats. So the government would argue this is all tying into also stopping the boats and reducing small boats crossings, but also has an economic impact in the fact that if people are not allowed to work illegally, that will have a positive impact on the UK economy. We're expecting some more announcements later today as well. So I think there's going to be a bit of a kind of a staggered approach to this. And they really want the public to start paying attention to the good that they are doing, because they feel they're not getting credit for it.
Murray, great stuff. Thank you very much. And Murray, Matthew's joined us because we're about to talk about all of the NFL action. And you wanted to stay for that specifically because of your love for American football.
Huge NFL fan. She's been talking about nothing else all morning.
Not just fan, aficionado. All the statistics, all the data.
All the data, that's me, that's me.
But anyway, there is a lot to talk about, the Super Bowl and the takeaways from it from last night. Matthew, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to see you. And, of course, the historic night for the Eagles. What exactly are we starting with here, guys? Just a historic night for the Eagles. Of course, stopping, Matthew, the Chiefs from what would have been a three in a row.
The so-called three-peat, exactly. It would have been the first time a team had ever done that in the history of the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs won the last two. They got to the final again. And actually, they were favourites in many quarters to take the third in a row, but they were stopped by the Eagles I didn't watch it, of course, because I was fast asleep in preparation for coming in here, Will. But by all accounts, was a pretty dominant performance, actually, by the Eagles. And also, you know, in the way that this inimitable way that sport only can achieve, was a bit of revenge in the air, because the I think the first of the two that Kansas City Chiefs won back in 2023 was against the Eagles. So it was a little bit of revenge in there as well, which always felt good for the Eagles fans, of which my brother-in-law is one, so he'll be delighted this morning.
Well, of course, the other big focus always with the Super Bowl is the halftime show. I think we've got a bit of that now.
Oh no! Too loud, too reckless, too ghetto. Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game? Then tighten up.
Nobody pray for me. It been a day for me.
Sometimes one wonders whether they could just post the halftime show in full for us the next morning. Is that available?
I think you can watch it. I think you can watch it on YouTube. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, that's the thing that many people tune in
Absolutely.
for. I mean, this is it's interesting because there just isn't quite an equivalent in the UK, is there? In terms of, we were talking about this morning. You know, like the FA Cup final, maybe Wimbledon, but it just doesn't have that sort of crossover between sport and popular culture that the Super Bowl does.
No, I mean, I prefer the way the Premier League operates, which is every game counts.
Yeah.
Winner of the league wins. But there's something about once you get to the Super Bowl and the import of it all. But Murray, the other thing I was going to say, what I kind of love, obviously, President Trump went, which was the first sitting president to be there, and he was in policy mode en route and back, announcing more tariffs as you go. And it is, I mean, obviously the powers of the executive office are greater than a prime minister has in that regard, but it is pretty dynamic and grabbing attention with these announcements left, right and centre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ever the politician. But also, I mean, the thing that Donald Trump is very good at, he understands popular culture and he understands, to an extent, what people seem to enjoy. When he was running for president, did you notice that he would go to a lot of UFC fights? Mm-hmm. Now, I am not a UFC fan, but lots of people
not as much as you are an NFL fan.
Yes, but people love the UFC. Yeah. And it really helped because he was going to UFC fights. He was then going on Joe Rogan's podcast. Joe Rogan is a UFC commentator. So all these things were tying together and speaking to people who weren't necessarily going to be watching interviews in the old-fashioned way. And so he's good at that.
Totally, and I think that's why I was so baffled that he's the first sitting president to go, because it's just such an open goal. Attend the most popular sporting and cultural event in your nation and, be seen to be, in inverted commas, cool. I mean, as I said to Mary this morning off air, we have prime ministers who pretend to like football teams. So desperate are they to tap into that thing. And this is the first president to go to a Super Bowl? It's extraordinary.
Well, Keir Starmer doesn't pretend. He rightfully supports the greatest football team in the world. But the interesting thing is a different point to make is the snapshot. Of course, he's been wildly criticised for going to sporting events. It is sort of lose-lose. I mean, to be fair, he's taken like free seats and all that kind of stuff. But it's a slightly different take on it. You kind of lose-lose from that perspective here. But yeah, there was nothing. What was the David Cameron? He said he supported.
It was Aston Villa.
He's a Villa fan, but he said West Ham.
Yeah, and he got them confused with West Ham.
They do
Admittedly, they wear the same colours. I mean, kind of thing an Aston Villa fan might be expected to know.
That is an absolute. Now we've got one other little clip, which is it's interesting, this, Matthew, because. Let's play it first. This is the reaction Taylor Swift received. Now, clearly being booed, but you never quite know if the mic's in one area or not. And what's interesting is she has got a lot of support from this sort of community because obviously she's dating the linebacker for the Chiefs, Travis Kelce. But that could equally just be booing because Eagles fans are anti the Chiefs on this all-important day.
That would have been my interpretation of it, that it is actually just Eagles fans booing Taylor Swift because of her obvious connection to the Kansas City Chiefs. But it's already being spun into something. You might have seen Donald Trump already on his Truth social media has tweeted a link to another account which has sort of put his cheers when he's seen on the Jumbotron next to Taylor Swift's and makes the point, the world is healing or something because Trump is being cheered and Taylor's being booed. So already, regardless of who was booing and why, it's being used and spun into a political victory for Donald Trump by his supporters.
You wouldn't have booed Taylor Swift, Murray, but you're not a massive Taylor Swift fan.
I am totally fine with Taylor Swift.
Might have even booed by the sound.
No. I just,
It's damning with faint praise. She's totally fine.
She's fab. There's loads of fabulous... Hey, on that stage for the Super Bowl, I'm a big SZA fan, so I would have enjoyed that show a lot. There we go.
Pretty epic.
There's Kendrick, and then you've got SZA as well. Fabulous. That's a little bit more at my street, but hey, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Taylor Swift.
I, on the other hand, had to have pronunciation lessons from Mary this morning on SZA. Not my natural area of expertise, I have to
say.
I did originally, but it was about 2 or 3 years ago. So, you know, been through that one.
You're much more ahead of the times than I am.
Guys, great stuff as always. Thanks so much, Maury, Matthew. Let's have a quick look at the weather before we welcome the Conservatives to get their response to all of the news of the day. It'll feel cold this week, possibly turning milder by next weekend, although timings are uncertain. It's chilly and frosty in the clearer north, especially Scotland. Breezier, cloudier conditions elsewhere have kept most other places frost-free. England, Wales look mostly rather dull again this morning with widespread showery outbreaks, some wintry, but Cumbria may well be dry and bright. That's the weather for you. Right, let's discuss all of the day's news with the Conservative Party's chair, Nigel Huddleston. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So it's 100 days of leadership for Kemi Badenoch. What's the rating out of 10 so far?
Oh, pretty good, yeah. Look, the key role of Leader of the Opposition is to hold the government to account, and Kemi's done a really good job at that. They're struggling, and we're making sure that everybody knows they're struggling. So she's done a very good job, as we would expect.
I mean, that's a fair point, that a key role is to hold the government to account, but as the opposition, presumably it's also to be at least a second place in the polls, and you must be worried about how well Reform's doing.
Well, some polls put us in second, some third, some in first place, which doesn't seem to get as much airtime for some reason.
Which in the last week?
There was a couple last week that put us first. So there are. I mean, there's tons of polls, but I mean, genuinely, you know, you're a journalist, you can look back and see them. So there are polls that also put us in first place. The key thing as well is that is remarkable achievement 7 months on from a general election where we got an absolute trouncing. If somebody had said to me, Nigel, we're going to make you chair of the Conservative Party on the 5th of July, and in 7 months' time you'll be on par, very close to or behind the party that just got over 400 seats, none of us would have believed them. And the reason for that is we are holding this shambolic government to account, and the British public can see that we're on their side, whether it's, you know, campaigning against the terrible things they're doing on winter fuel, on damaging business through taxes, on farms, the attack on schools, all of these kind of things, we are making sure that the public know we're on their side and we're holding Labour to account. That is our job. We are a responsible party of potential government, and therefore we take this job of opposition really seriously.
Is your final comment there to imply that you don't think Reform is a responsible party of government?
Reform is a force to be reckoned with, but they are protesting. They are a populist party. They are trying to give easy, simple answers to really complex questions. You can do that, but if you want to be a party of government, you have to recognise things are a lot more complex. Now, many Reform voters share many of the values that we hold dear as Conservatives and the principles, but we exhibit them and want to implement them in government. That is our job, to hold this government to account, eventually to replace them and make sure a Conservative government is in place. That's our purpose. Nigel Farage has said many occasions his #1 purpose is to destroy the Conservative Party. That's a completely different thing. How's that going to get rid of this Labour government? You know, it's a very, very different proposition.
If both parties are still roughly at similar percentages in the polls, would it make sense to have some kind of merger or electoral pact if neither of them makes a clear move to the lead?
Well, for the reasons I just said, you know, that's not a sensible proposition. Nigel Farage is saying his goal is he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. How on earth could you do a deal with an entity, a group, a body that says they want to destroy you? That's not a great relationship. But as I said, my appeal, any pact that I would have, would be to Conservative-minded voters, please join us. Please join the Conservative Party. The best way we can get rid of this lefty, shambolic government, this Labour government, is to make sure that we get Conservatives elected, whether that's at local elections or at the general election next time, which, after all, is 4 years away. The polls can go up, the polls can go down. And be in no doubt, I do not underestimate the attractiveness of Reform to many people. But in terms of Conservative Party policies and principles, they belong to the Conservative Party. And in many ways, Reform is not really proposing Conservative Party policies. Their manifesto at the last election had £140 billion of tax and spending promises. That's not responsible government. That would not stack up with Conservative Party principles. It's very popular, it's populist, it's not conservative.
Well, to be fair, we haven't had many policies from your leader of late, so we also can't test fully yet on that front.
Look, but we're very clear on the principles, and also you have seen some policy announcements. And when we do, and that's a deliberate strategy, because Kemi has said very clearly we are going through a process of recognising and understanding, and we need to show the public we understand why they booted us out, and therefore develop a policy platform that is credible, not just noise, not just making announcements. We need a detailed plan of policies that are credible, because we just don't want to just make noise and make false promises. We want to make sure the British public understand we are an alternative government. So that means making policies over time, and you will see more, which is announced policies on immigration. We've been very clear that we would reverse, many of the policies that Labour have implemented, for example, the farm tax.
Well, let's talk about the farmers. Obviously, there's a gathering in Westminster today.
Yeah.
Will Kemi not be there in person and speaking at it?
I don't know whether she's speaking at it, but we've got a strong presence. In fact, later on this morning, I'm meeting with a lot of Conservative MPs to do a demonstration as well. So we will be very visible, and we have been right across the country. This is a thing not just in Westminster, but in the constituencies. You've got Conservative MPs, Conservative candidates, Conservative councillors, because we represent large parts of the rural area that are under attack by this government in many ways. The farm tax, what they're doing with planning, all sorts of things, telling us how we need to restructure government. They are attacking the countryside, and we represent the countryside, and we represent those people. We understand their issues and concerns, so we are standing shoulder to shoulder with them today and previously.
Let's touch on the latest around Andrew Gwynn and Oliver Ryan. A sort of broad question for you. Does a presence in a WhatsApp group and not immediately calling out something that somebody else has said, to you seem sufficient to lose a party whip, or do you have to say something terrible yourself?
I think the important thing is you've got to... I mean, certainly Andrew Gwynn's comments that I've seen are atrocious, and it's right that Keir Starmer attacked him. I mean, and it speaks to the mentality as well. It's not only the fact that he put it on a WhatsApp group. It's the fact that he thought that that was appropriate in the first place. And again, goes back to Labour MPs thinking that they can attack pensioners. They don't like people who don't generally vote for them. And I think that then being on a WhatsApp group and saying something that is completely inappropriate, you should call out or leave the WhatsApp group. And I think that, the other MPs involved will have to be held to account. And I think the Chief Whip's having a robust conversation with Oliver today, and that's appropriate.
And the same would happen if comments in WhatsApp groups applied to Conservative MPs under your chairmanship?
We take complaints very seriously, and we have an independent complaints process. So if this behaviour has been seen by people, then they can make a complaint, and it's independent. So, it's not me adjudicating with any political bias or mates or anything like that. It's an independent process. So we do take these things very seriously. But I say, in this particular circumstances, saying, oh, don't just put it on the WhatsApp group. No, I'm more concerned that the mentality of thinking that this kind of behaviour is appropriate in the first place.
Just finally, in terms of the latest set of tariffs announced by President Trump, 25% on steel and aluminium, luck or design so far, the UK is exempt from them?
Well, previously, when we've had the US impose tariffs, the UK has managed to get exemptions because we've had very good relationships with the US and we've engaged with them. That was when we were in power. That was what happened, including with steel previously. Unfortunately, this government does not have the same relationship. We've had a Prime Minister and a Foreign Secretary who've gone out of their way in the past to offend the leader of the free world.
But they haven't got tariffs yet.
We'll see what's coming. But I hope we don't, by the way. I hope they're able to negotiate. But also, just the Department for Business and Trade, where I and Kemi worked at, we were doing trade deals around the world, championing free trade. We need to engage with the US on these conversations. I don't believe that the Department for Business and Trade has had much engagement with the US yet. They should do. They are a really important trade partner, about £300 billion of bilateral trade. We were working really close with them. We actually did have negotiations for a free trade agreement before President Biden came in. They can pick that deal up and start to negotiate that again, but my understanding is that they're not. So I'd encourage Labour to engage with the US constructively and see how we can make the best deal that would be in the best interest of the UK and the US.
Nigel Hudson, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, farmers will stage another round of protests in Westminster today, rallying against changes to inheritance tax rules. Sky correspondent Dan Whitehead joins me now from Manor Farm. Talk us through the latest on what we're expecting today, because we've seen some of these protests already. Is it more of the same, or is there a new aspect to it?
Well, there's a petition which started last year against these reforms to inheritance tax. That's received around 150,000 signatories against it. Went over the 100,000 threshold, so it's going to be debated in Parliament at 4:30 this afternoon. And to coincide with that debate in Westminster, you're going to see thousands of farmers, hundreds of tractors, again descending onto Whitehall and outside Downing Street. Let's chat to the organiser of today's protest, Liz Webster from Save British Farming. Thanks for letting us come down on your farm before we all head to London. Look, the government has told Sky News yet again that they are steadfast in support of farmers, but that this reform to inheritance tax is balanced and fair. They're not budging. I mean, are these protests having any impact or working at all, do you think?
Look, protests or rallying or campaigning, and we're communicating with the country because we want the country to understand what it means for them if we lose our farms. And that's what we're doing. So we're telling a story. And so every time we come out, we're communicating to the public, and we want the public to email their MPs, particularly if they're Labour MPs, because whether you live in the city or in the countryside, you rely on a farmer for food. And if the government continue with these policies, we will really be in trouble for food.
The big change coming in April 26 is that for farms over £1 million, you're going to look at 20% inheritance tax. That's a big change for farmers, and the fear is that it will put a lot of small farms out of business. There's some rumours that there could be an increase in that threshold, let's say, to £10 million. Would you welcome a change like that?
That would be a lot more comfortable. But if you look at it from a food security point of view, we're all not making enough money to really make a proper wage. So the very big farms actually are still in whilst they might have a lot of asset value, there still isn't enough money in there to pay huge inheritance tax bills. And what it means is that our food system will collapse and we won't have enough food. And that is what people need to think about. Rather than individual farmers, this is about a food system that we all rely on. And if you remember in COVID, we all came out clapping for farmers because we need food. And, that's what this government don't seem to recognise. And we're trying to communicate to them, if we don't have enough food in this country, there will be major problems.
You're heavily involved, and I know behind the scenes there are negotiations with the NFU, with government, with influential farming groups like yourselves. Are you confident, or do you feel that there's going to be any shift at all from the Labour government?
I really hope so, because the inheritance tax itself, if it continues to next April, is going to cause a humanitarian crisis. Many elderly farmers know that they can save their family farm by not being alive after that deadline. And that is a really, really heartbreaking and terrifying reality. And that's why so many farmers are exercised, because we want to look after our farming families. We are a community.
Nigel Farage is speaking at a farm up in North London. It's one of the muster points for farmers all heading from around the country down to London. Is he a good advocate for this cause of farming?
Nigel loves to be he wants to feel part of our tribe. But Nigel loves America, and he puts Trump first. Now, if we put Trump first and America first and do a deal with them, British farming will not survive an America trade deal. They say America first for a reason. The quantities of scale, they are very aggressive exporters. There is no hope for British farming if we have an American trade deal. So if Nige wants to come in with us, he needs to drop his desire to do a trade deal with America. And I can't see any sign of that happening.
Okay, Liz, thanks for chatting to us. Nigel Farage, we've got a Sky News camera up there. We expect him on a tank this morning. Watch out for those pictures. Hundreds of tractors arriving into Westminster from 1 o'clock. The debate in Parliament starts at 4:30.
Dan, as always, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show as Beijing hits back. Can China and the US avoid a trade war escalation? And as farmers return to Westminster, as Dan just mentioned, their tractors expected in Whitehall later this morning. Will the protest persuade the government to back down on changes to inheritance tax? We will discuss with farmer Ollie Fletcher here in studio.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. Just wanted to bring you some latest pictures coming from Paris. Of course, we've been mentioning that President Macron's hosting a big AI summit in Paris today and managed to attract quite an impressive list of attendees, including that, as you can see, just arriving moments ago, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, and his entire family there in shot, coming off Air Force 2 to meet with President Macron and the gathered executives and investors, of course. Quite the impressive gathering, something that Prime Minister Starmer will be taking note of, I'm sure, both for the broad gathering at the summit as a whole, but also to attract the Vice President of the United States to his soil before, of course, anybody else in Europe has done since the inauguration. Switching focus. If you're driving around Whitehall today, expect delays as farmers hold another tractor rally in protest of planned changes to inheritance tax rules. Well, farmer and YouTuber Ollie Fletcher is with me here in studio. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
What's the message today? Is it the same as before, or is there a more detailed nuance to it?
Well, we feel that we've delivered a very strong message to both the public and politicians on inheritance tax. So
we're hoping to broaden out the message a little bit to highlight some of the other issues that are facing agriculture, because while inheritance tax is the flashpoint, we really are struggling across a whole range of issues. Agriculture at the moment is going through the agricultural transition, as it's being termed, as the post-war consensus has been taken away. The cheap food subsidies we've had since the war that were preserved through the European Union's common agricultural policy have been withdrawn. So we're not being supported to produce food anymore.
Have been replaced with different types of subsidies.
They don't support food production. They support environmental things, which tend not to support working farmers in the way they do support landlords. And as a result, 17% of people in this country are suffering food insecurity, which is not a coincidence.
So I mean, it's interesting. I wasn't going to go down this route, but farmers in general are negative towards Brexit?
I would say so. We used to milk 100 cows at home, and we were very strong believers in the work that we were doing, providing cheap, nutritious foods for our fellow workers in the countryside, in the city, forgive me. But that was the spirit of post-war agriculture. The consensus that was put in place by the Labour Party was that workers in the countryside would be empowered to own their own land, which at the time was actually quite remarkable. During the agricultural revolution, the idea that was established was that landlords would own the land and farmers would be tenants. So after the war, farmers as workers were empowered to own their land and provide cheap food for the workers in the cities. And that is the settlement that we're trying to preserve. But we're having to fight the party that implemented it to do so, which really is bizarre.
So in terms of the engagement you've had, both on the past protests and today, are the government engaging with you on all of these topics and listening, do you feel, or not?
The government aren't engaging with us as much as we would like. We have attempted to get representation from the Labour Party to speak at the protest, but I know from Vox Pops that we've done and from members of the public that I know personally, people not involved in farming, that this is getting through. People, even if obviously they have their own concerns, they might not be clued up on all of the different issues farmers are facing, but they do get a sense that the government are not being fair to us. And they have an understanding that what we're trying to fight for is in the national interest. We are fighting for food security, and this country has learned in the First World War and in the Second World War that we cannot take risks when it comes to our food supply.
Albeit, of course, we're not in wartime at the moment. You talked about some of the different topics that you want to highlight today. What about different tactics? Are you reticent to elevate the scale of protest beyond tractors in Westminster and lose some of that support you might have?
Polling shows that at the moment we are winning the argument with the public. Even most Labour members support our cause. So I'm very cautious to keep on that track. We are going to keep campaigning. We're not going to go away. We're organised now and we're going to keep using the machines that we're building. But we're very keen not to lose public support. So I would not personally support going off the deep end, doing anything that would antagonise the public, because we don't need to do that.
What time does the protest really get going today?
It should get going at 1. And anything that happens before 1 is not by Save British Farming.
It's not by Save British Farming?
No, that's our group. It starts at 1. It's all organised with the Met. As with previous protests, it will be done entirely by the book. We're very orderly, very polite. And hopefully it'll be a very good day.
So what is your assessment of where we are at the moment? What is more likely, that you will have to go as far as implementing a tactic that would limit food supply, for example, or the government will back down on this inheritance tax issue?
Well, I'm hoping the Labour Party will listen to us, because I think that what we're fighting for is fundamentally the preservation of a socialist policy that was put in place by the Labour Party after the war. It's worker ownership of the means of production.
Ollie, stick with us, because I want you to get your reaction to this. I know this is not part of your organised protest, but let's listen to Nigel Farage, who's just taken to the stage.
Because the MPs need to listen. Now, look, I have believed right from the very start that provided this campaign was sustained and was taking place all over the country, I actually think there are some wins that we can get from this. Why? Well, normally, governments with big parliamentary majorities can do what the hell they like. This government has a big parliamentary majority, but 7 months in, how well's it going? They are doing very, very badly indeed, and they're scared out of their lives. They've got 100 Labour MPs that are representing rural or semi-rural constituencies. And from what I can see, Joe Public is getting behind the concept that the family farm should not be driven out of existence. So politically, I think we can win this. And what's really exciting is other groups are getting on board too. Because this IHT, it isn't just the farms that it hits, it's family businesses as well. In fact, inheritance tax, when you think about it, it's on money that we paid tax on already. The whole thing's monstrous. So I think the country now is going to come together with lots of different groups, and let's just stand up and say no to death taxes, full stop. End death taxes. They're wrong, they're immoral at every level. And the way your community is being treated is unbelievable. I think somebody in the Treasury got their sums wrong when they set the financial limits, or could it be they just want lots of land? Because they're planning for...
So Nigel Farage there, addressing the early start of these protests, although as our guest here in studio, Ollie Fletcher, was saying, tractors aren't expected to roll in immediately. Where does do farmers stand about which party best supports them?
Well, on that clip, it didn't show the crowd, and I looked at the live stream on the way here, and there was about 5 people there, which I'm not exaggerating when I say. Agriculture in this country in the 1930s was subjected to American imports, right? And that meant 2 things. Firstly, that British farmers were utterly impoverished, but also that the standard of nutrition in cities was absolutely inadequate, which is why the Labour Party introduced a cheap food policy after the war. If farmers back Nigel Farage, he will go to America, as he's already doing, and he will push for an American free trade agreement, which will return us to that situation. And that is not in farmers' interest. But the message here to the Labour Party is that if they do not back workers in the countryside, workers will inevitably turn to populist parties. This is something the Labour Party needs to get a hold of and needs to show leadership on, and then they will get farmers' support. Because we want what they need, which is a cheap food policy that supports us and provides cheap, affordable, nutritious food for workers in the cities. That is in their interest, and it's in the national interest.
Ollie Fletcher, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. We're going to go back to listen to a little bit more of Nigel Farage.
Here and around the country. I also promise that if we have anything to do with it after the next general election, and you never know, the polls are looking quite good at the moment. If we have anything to do with it after the next election, if this has been done to your community, I promise you we will reverse it. And I make that as a promise to you. So look, let's keep fighting. Let's keep the pressure up here and right around the country. And by the way, you've all been behaving impeccably. I know some think more radical action is planned for, but remember, we're not French. All right? They might set fire to things. That might be their culture. It's not our culture. And I would urge all of you, despite how much you've got on the line, despite how distressing this is, and I know in Clacton itself, I've met farming families in tears because they so desperately want to hand this on to the next generations. But please, keep doing it the way you're doing it. Voluble, but peaceful, within the law. And I tell you what, if we do that, we'll get the whole country on side. I wish you all the very best of luck. I promise you, I am right behind you. To London we go!
Nigel Farage there, wrapping up some of his comments in northwest London before, I guess, the protests move into more central areas in Westminster in particular. It's a story we're going to be across for you throughout the day here live on Sky News, particularly, of course, as the protest gathers and builds in central London. Well, still to come here on The Breakfast Show as the EU and Beijing hit back. Can the world avoid an escalating trade war with the US? We'll discuss.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's get more now on President Trump's announcement that he plans to impose a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports into the United States. And, of course, a discussion on the latest imposition of tariffs from China in retaliation against the first extra 10% that Trump imposed on China. Well, I'm joined by Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre of Economics and Business Research. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's touch on this latest announcement that President Trump made en route to the Super Bowl, no less. Tariffs on steel and aluminium, will that affect the UK?
Not necessarily, because we don't actually export very much of that to the US, but it would certainly affect the EU, and that's a problem. We had that before, of course, in his first presidency, so it's not new. And somehow or other, he managed to use that at the time to encourage, on paper anyway, the Chinese to buy more of US goods. But then, of course, we had COVID and everything else, and it didn't really happen. And of course, he was no longer there. So he may be using it once again, just as a negotiating ploy, because he actually has said repeatedly that what he also wants is for the Chinese to stop exporting the types of chemicals which are then used for the production of drugs in Mexico in particular, which are then imported into the US. So there's a little bit of that going on, but it is causing quite a lot of consternation for everybody, because it's not just the 25% that we're talking about now, possibly, which should be imposed, but we've also got now a real trade war, because the Chinese have finally done what they said they would do, which is retaliate by imposing tariffs themselves, 10% or 15%, depending on what goods we're talking about from the US. So it is getting a little bit more worrying.
In terms of the way in which this will affect the global economy, it's funny you mentioned there that we've seen the aluminium and steel tariffs before from him. Is the global economy more prepared for protectionism this time around, such that despite all of the significant rhetoric and indeed follow-up with hard actions from the US president and the Chinese, might the global economy be all right?
It's a very good question. I mean, you could look at China and you can see that actually it's moving away from exporting so much to the US, for example, as a percentage of its overall trade than it did before. And now it's focusing a lot more on domestic growth. There are times when this doesn't happen because obviously, China has been hit by all sorts of slow trends in the economy itself on the domestic side. So it hasn't been able to do completely what it wants to do, which is not be reliant on exports. But it has reduced its export dependency, so it can probably cope with it considerably more than perhaps it would have done otherwise. But the other alternative, of course, is that if they can't export to the US, they will just dump their products somewhere else. And that's always a worry for the world economy and for trade, particularly for Europe. But if Europe is also subjected to that, then Europe is not ready. Europe has been talking about improving its competitiveness and supporting its domestic industry a lot more. But actually, it's not ready for a trade war right now because it hasn't really managed to do what it says it wants to do. So, but there will be an acceleration of every country trying to be more self-sufficient, and that's going to be a serious problem for everyone because lower trade, as you suggested, means less growth in the world economy. So we are also going to be affected inevitably in the UK as well.
What is your view as to what this all means for the US economy? Are you as optimistic as many are that they can kind of continue growing regardless, even improve their growth rate under President Trump?
Well, there will be pressures on prices. I mean, what we saw, for example, is that interest rates are not falling in the US as they should do, which of course affects growth because the Federal Reserve is worried about the impact of tariffs on inflation. Now, of course, we haven't seen the Mexican and or the tariffs on Canada actually materializing yet. So those are the main areas that might be affecting inflation in the US. But anything else that comes in, which has an extra cost on it, including the difficulty perhaps of exporting to places like China, which they do to a considerable extent, then that's going to affect prices, keep interest rates higher than they otherwise would be, and also affect their own exports. So yes, I think tariffs are not particularly good for the US economy either, frankly, and they're not good for the world economy.
Vicky Price, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We're going to have a quick look at the weather as we leave you, and it will feel cold this week, possibly turning milder by the weekend, although the timing of that transition is uncertain. Chilly and frosty in the north, especially Scotland, and breezier conditions elsewhere. That's your weather. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. When we come back, we'll have all of the day's top stories, including some heartfelt reaction from the mothers of the Southport victims.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here? You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
A very good morning to you. It is 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, Donald Trump pushes the world a little closer to a global trade war.
Plus, a second Labour MP is apologising this morning for past WhatsApp messages.
It's Monday, the 10th of February. Your headlines. Touching down in New Orleans for the Super Bowl, Donald Trump announces plans for a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports.
Retaliatory tariffs from China take effect from today, with no sign of progress between the two countries.
A second MP is caught up in the Labour WhatsApp group row and deeply regrets the comments he made. One of the key moments from the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl victory over the Kansas City Chiefs, denying them what would have been a historic third-in-a-row win. Plus,
Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game?
Nobody pray for me. It been a day for me.
Kendrick Lamar, SZA and Uncle Samuel Jackson add sparkle to the halftime show of the highlights. A very good morning to you. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Donald Trump has pushed the potential of a global trade war a little closer this morning. A flurry of major announcements by the US president included plans for a new 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium entering the United States. He made the announcement while flying over the newly minted Gulf of America en route to sport's most star-studded evening. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has this first report.
There is no bigger moment on the American cultural calendar. The Super Bowl is everything. And so, harnessing the moment, as he has every moment of the past few weeks here, Donald Trump in the stadium. He is so very intentionally the omnipresent president. But it was his journey here which generated the headlines. On Gaza, on tariffs, on Putin. Air Force One had brought him from his home in Florida and over the Gulf of Mexico, the perfect moment for the first headline.
This is a proclamation declaring today, February 9th, 2025, is the first ever Gulf of America Day.
And we're flying right over it right now. So we thought this would be appropriate.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please direct your attention out the right side of the aircraft. Air Force One is currently in international waters, the first time in history flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
A presidential order to rewrite the map. Then came an impromptu news conference and a flurry of real news.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum?
Aluminum too.
10%?
No, 25%.
25 for aluminum?
25 for both.
On Gaza, he doubled down, but this time claiming he'd buy it. It's not clear from who.
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it.
And on conversations with Russia's President Putin, he wouldn't be drawn on the detail or when conversations had taken place.
I know you don't want to tell us about your conversation with President Putin, but can you clarify whether you had that since you've been in office or whether it happened before you became president?
I've had it. Let's just say I've had it. And I expect to have many more conversations.
Back at the star-studded game, it was the Philadelphia Eagles night. The president didn't stay for the end, back instead to the White House for another dramatic week of change.
The Eagles are Super Bowl champions for the second time.
For America and well beyond. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Well, in the last hour, the EU Commission has insisted any tariffs imposed by Donald Trump on the bloc would be unlawful and completely unjustified. It said it hasn't yet received details of any tariffs and would not respond to broad announcements, but claimed the move would be economically unproductive. Well, let's get more on what it means now for Asia and in China in particular. Our Asia correspondent Nicole Johnson's there for us live in Beijing. Nicole, clearly today was meant to be a day when we would be talking about China imposing its retaliatory tariffs on the US for the US's initial tariffs. But now there's a new salvo. Just bring us up to date on where we stand between the US and China.
That's right. That news has been somewhat usurped by this information about the steel and aluminium tariffs. But China's retaliatory tariffs are starting today. They announced those about a week ago. We were expecting that there would be a telephone call between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. This still hasn't happened, so the tariffs are going into effect. Now, for the United States, that means a 10 to 15% tariff on coal, liquefied natural gas, crude oil, farm machinery and pickup trucks exported to China. Also, China has introduced some export restrictions on critical minerals. These are minerals that are very important for the production of items to do with the defence industry, solar panels, anything to power green technology and semiconductors. So this will hit the United States hard. But it is targeted measures by China. It goes to show that China's trying to be somewhat careful and considered in how it deals with the United States, probably because they're still hoping that at some stage they can reach a deal or a bargain on how to conduct their trading relationship going forward.
Nicole, talk us through the sort of state of play for the Chinese economy at the moment. I know from afar, it's been sort of struggling but still growing of late. Is that still the sort of fair conclusion, and will these tariffs make that worse?
Well, China has said that its GDP growth was at 5% last year, on target. So it is trying to paint the view of the economy in the best possible light. But without a doubt, from one end of the country to the other, we travel around it, we're speaking to people, we're doing stories about the crisis in the real estate sector, youth unemployment, domestic consumption, people shopping, people saving, the demographic crisis. There are all sorts of fundamental economic issues that are challenging China right now. It knows it has some serious headwinds. It is trying to deal with them. It is trying to get people to start spending money instead of putting it under their mattresses, so to speak. But it's a difficult juggernaut to try and turn around. In March, we'll have a major meeting of the Chinese Communist Party. That usually gives some indication about how they'll progress going forwards. But China has bet very big on green technology. They're putting as much money as they can into developing electric vehicles, solar panels, lithium batteries. And the government here is hoping that that will drive and power their economy into the future. They no longer want to be the cheapest factory floor in the world. They want to be investing in these high technology industries. But as we can see, these tariffs will have an impact on China. Not as serious as it perhaps would have been 10, 20 years ago, because China has been quite astute in trying to broaden their export base. They're no longer as reliant on the United States, but they have trading friends and partners all over the world. And there is also a view here in China that this situation with the United States and chaotic tariffs could be a window of opportunity for China. It could give them a chance to step in where, as the United States steps out and present themselves as a predictable, stable, dependable trading partner, especially to global South countries, those developing countries who may be looking at what's happening in the United States and thinking, well, I perhaps don't trust the United States to stay on track to its agreements that we've had in the past.
Nicole, as always, thanks so much. Let's take a look now at some of the morning's other top stories. Well, police in Dublin are questioning a man in his 20s over the stabbing of 3 people. Officials say they responded to an incident in the Stoneybatter area of the city at around 3 p.m. yesterday, describing it as an awful random attack. Israeli troops have withdrawn from the Netzarim corridor, a key strip of land separating northern Gaza from the south. The corridor has seen the passage of thousands of Palestinians moving back into their homes in northern Gaza since the ceasefire came into effect. The Church of England's General Synod will gather later for the first time since the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation last year. Justin Welby stood down following a damning report into the Church's handling of a sexual abuse scandal. It's hoped a landmark plan being presented will help improve the way those types of allegations are handled in the future. Now let's bring you up to speed with all the latest overnight from the Super Bowl and take you through some of the highlights both on and off the field of play. The Philadelphia Eagles claimed victory over the Kansas City Chiefs by a resounding 40-22. Donald Trump was there. He was the first sitting US president to attend a Super Bowl, and he was accompanied by a large entourage that included his daughter, Ivanka Trump, and was greeted largely by cheers. On the flip side, Taylor Swift, of course, girlfriend of the Kansas City Chiefs' Travis Kelce, received a vastly different welcome and was booed. Albeit, of course, she's come to represent one side, the Kansas City Chiefs, and no doubt a lot of that booing was from Eagles fans on the other side.
Oh no! Too loud, too reckless, too ghetto. Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game? Then tighten up!
Nobody pray for me. It been a day for me.
Well, the halftime show featured Samuel L. Jackson dressed as Uncle Sam, and he introduced rapper Kendrick Lamar. Also a performance from SZA as well. Congratulations again to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, to news here now. A second Labour MP has admitted being in a WhatsApp group with the now sacked Health Minister Andrew Gwynn. Oliver Ryan said he deeply regrets the comments made in the group. Our political correspondent Mari Aurora is here. So, Mari, just bring us up to speed with what the latest is and what the government is saying this morning about it.
So the latest, what emerged over the weekend was alleged misogynistic, racist, anti-Semitic comments made in this WhatsApp group years ago by Andrew Gwynn, who was, until very recently, a health minister in the Labour government. He's now been sacked and also suspended from the party. And then the kind of most recent development that happened overnight was we were aware that there was another Labour MP in this WhatsApp group, and now it has been revealed it was Oliver Ryan. Oliver Ryan is quite a new MP. He was in the WhatsApp group, and essentially a lot of the stuff that Andrew Gwynn was saying, he didn't say anything or kind of, push back on it. He also is alleged to have made some comments, offensive comments about a gay fellow Labour MP as well. And so Oliver Ryan's come out and apologised. He's posted on social media saying some of the comments made in that group were completely unacceptable. I fully condemn them. I regret not speaking out at the time, and I recognise that failing to do so was wrong. He then also says some of the comments he himself made he deeply regrets and he would not make today. However, we still don't know what kind of action, repercussions, punishment there'll be for Oliver Ryan. When it comes to Andrew Gwynn, he's already been sacked and suspended, but Oliver Ryan yet still remains with the Labour whip. We understand he's having a meeting with the Chief Whip today to discuss his comments, his actions, and then action will be taken. And a government source has told us that no action is off the table when it comes to potential sanctions on Oliver Ryan. So it'll be interesting to see, once that meeting has taken place today, what the Chief Whip decides and what the party decides, whether to leave him with the Labour whip or whether they think it's appropriate to suspend the whip from him as well. Now, the party are insisting that they have acted swiftly. Angela Eagle speaking to you this morning on the show, saying that it was a combination of context matters and also people needed to appreciate that the PM had acted very, very quickly. But nonetheless, you were asking her what to an extent, her personal opinion on this was and whether sanctions need to be quite tough.
I think that's a matter for the Chief Whip to decide when he talks to the MP in question today. And I think also the investigation will be about context, will be about who said what when, and that will give the individuals the chance to explain themselves. Both of them have apologised. Context is important, and that's why we need to wait to see what the investigation says. I haven't seen the context in this group, and that's for those that are investigating in the party, and those, and also the Chief Whip. But I note that the MP in question has apologised profusely this morning.
And Mari, the government wants us to be focusing, though, this week and today in particular, on sort of what they're doing behind the scenes, under the surface, to tackle illegal immigration.
Yeah, totally. So exactly that. They really want us focusing on what they would see as their success stories when it comes to tackling illegal immigration. And so this week they want to kind of shout from the rooftops about the amount of people they have arrested, detained, deported, the raids that they're doing. So they've been doing raids on businesses, and they really want to draw attention to the data around the fact that they've deported over 16,000 people since they won the election, and that in January this year alone, over 600 arrests were made and over 800 raids. Now that is a 73% increase in arrests compared to January of last year under the Conservatives. So what they're trying to say is actually what they're trying to say is they are doing good work and they're not getting the credit for it. So they are spending this week trying to show, rather than tell, the government, the public, that the government is really getting a grip on illegal migration. Yvette Cooper's talking about the fact that this is showing people that they will not be allowed to come here, work illegally, and essentially have a life. Those days are over. But what's really interesting is we've been talking a lot about reform. We had Nigel Farage live on the screens earlier on that farmers' protest. Reform is a really big threat to the Labour Party as well as the Conservative Party. And so a lot of Labour MPs are saying that crime and immigration is something that Labour and Keir Starmer need to talk about more in terms of finding ways to kind of lure some of those reform-minded voters back to the Labour Party. However, nonetheless, there are lots of Labour MPs who are also very much at threat from the Lib Dems and the Greens. And so the difficulty for Labour is finding a way to speak to reform voters and bring some of those back, but also not lose those Lib Dem and Green-minded voters who don't like the kind of tough immigration rhetoric. And that is a really difficult balance to strike.
Yeah, difficult for both of the main two parties, but certainly the government most in focus. As always, Mari, thanks so much. Now, farmers, as Mari mentioned, will stage another round of protests in Westminster today, rallying against changes to inheritance tax and broadening their protests into other areas as well. Sky correspondent Dan Whitehead joins me now from a farm in Wiltshire. Dan, what's in focus there for you today?
Well, the protest today in Westminster, which kicks off at 1 o'clock, is coinciding with a debate in Parliament. There was a big petition that's received 150,000 signatures on the government's website. That's kicked into the debate. So farmers from across the country are coming down to London, and it's being led by Save British Farming, the campaign group, and the organiser, Liz Webster. We're on her farm this morning. Liz, thanks for letting us come down before you head up to Whitehall and Westminster. We talked last hour about the fact that the government says that they are committed to farmers, but that actually this change to inheritance tax is fair, it is balanced, and really they are not budging at all. Do you think there's going to be any reform or any chance of getting Labour to shift?
Well, we all hope so. It's as I pointed out, it's a humanitarian crisis. And if we go into next April and there aren't changes, they're going to have a lot of blood on their hands. And, they're going to have to go through that. They need to do something. It's like a boiling pressure pot. And so I hope they're listening, and I hope they do that, something to ease the pressure. But really we need more than just something. We need a food production plan to feed the country.
Well, the Brexit, you say humanitarian crisis. That is a pretty dramatic way of describing what's going on. A lot of people watching say, look, there's still going to be food in the supermarkets here. It doesn't really matter, does it?
Look. The way it works with family farms and the way that the shock of the change means that the elderly, older farmer members own the farm because the advice was to hold on to the farm until you pass away. And the shock of the change means that those that are older will be thinking, well, you know, if I'm still here after April, then my family's going to lose the farm. And so they may decide that they'll save their family from that catastrophe. And that is really why farmers are so exercised. It's a very difficult topic. Mental health is a real problem for farming. But this is why farmers are so upset by it. It's not, we'd love to be able to pay the inheritance tax, but we don't earn enough money to be able to afford it. The only way we can pay the inheritance tax is by selling up part of or all of the farm. Then you lose your home, your livelihood and everything all in one go. But for people at home, you lose your food. And then you'll be looking at, you know, going begging to Donald Trump for imports.
Briefly, this isn't just about inheritance tax, is it? You know, we were talking about food security, and we talk about tariffs and Donald Trump, where our food comes from as well.
Completely. This has been a wide open thing since Brexit started. We came out of the CAP. We don't have a plan for food. And we're looking at this, are we going to go and try and heal the wound with the EU, or are we going to go to Donald Trump? If we go to Donald Trump, it's America first. Their products are highly subsidised. They're also much, much lower standard than our food. And they'll also send their lowest quality food. They're not going to send us their best stuff. It'll be full of preservatives and it will undercut our food. And we're already facing a lot of competition because of the Australia deal and the New Zealand deal. We've got more food coming in from Brazil. And so if we have the American deal, it's a tsunami which will actually destroy our healthy British food. And everybody will be forced to eat American food. And then if Donald Trump gets cross with us, he can say, well, Britain, I'm not going to send you food unless you do as I say. And that is a very uncomfortable place to be in.
Liz, thanks very much. I know you're heading to London. 700 tractors we're expecting or so down in Westminster, Whitehall, outside Downing Street. Speeches at 3 o'clock. The debate in Parliament starts at 4:30.
Dan, great stuff. As always, thanks so much. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll speak to the author of a new book on their experience of the reality of being a refugee. And we'll talk all things AI as world leaders gather in Paris for what's become a key geopolitical issue.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. A new book is shining a fairly rare positive light on a story so often wrapped in heartache. The Bicycle is the tale of how a simple act of kindness changed a young refugee's life. I'm pleased to say that young refugee is also the author, and she joins me now, Mevan Babakar. Thanks so much for joining us. Very good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I should add that this is a children's book, ultimately. And so you want to get this positive take on this, you know, as I said, story often filled with heartache across not just to everyone, but to children in particular.
Yeah, that's right. Not just to children, but to parents. And ultimately, it's a very universal story about the power of one kind gesture, and that having an impact far beyond that gesture.
Well, explain for us a little bit your story and what that kind gesture you're referring to was.
Yeah, I was a refugee in the early 90s for 5 years because of Saddam's genocide of the Kurds. And in all the ways that the world for the next 5 years taught me that I didn't really matter very much, when I think back on it as an adult, it was actually the kindnesses that along the way that kept me and my family going. It was a pot of nail varnish, a coat, a shoe, a pair of shoes, or a bicycle in this case, which is what the book is about.
And you attempted to, in the process of going through all of this, to track down some of those individuals that had shown you those acts of kindness.
Exactly, yeah. So as an adult, I retraced the journey my family and I took in the early 90s. And along the way, I tried to find the people who had done these acts of kindnesses and to thank them. And in the Netherlands, in particular, there was one shining example, which was an aid worker who had gifted me a bike. And as a 5-year-old, I didn't really have many things at the time. And to be given this big, beautiful, shiny red bike, my 5-year-old heart just exploded with joy. And so that feeling stayed with me as I grew older. And in 2020, I managed to find him again and actually say thank you.
How did you track him down?
I tracked him down through social media. At a time when Twitter was a bit nicer, I actually put a tweet out and said, hey, internet, this man gifted me a bike. I'd really love to find him. I'd really love to thank him in person. Within minutes, it was being retweeted like wildfire. And within an hour, I was in a studio, actually, with a group of investigative journalists trying to find him. And then within 24 hours, I was actually being driven to his door to thank him in person.
Wow, that quickly?
It was that quick, and it was incredible. Yeah.
That is unbelievable, and those pictures are really heartwarming. You mentioned in the 90s, your original journey as a refugee, that there were these little acts of kindness that you got to experience. Were they in the minority of what you had to go through? Was there a great deal of, maybe not sort of anger and pain that you faced, but was kindness hard to come by?
I think that the beautiful thing about kindness is even if it's rare, its impact is so huge and it's so long-lasting that it's not just an act that happens in that one moment, it's an act that stays with you for a lifetime. And that was true for all of those things. So even though they were rare, they were side by side with me for the next 30 years.
As you look at things now, do you think that it's a problem that is just vastly bigger than it was even in the 90s, even though you've experienced it so much more readily than anyone could imagine?
I actually think that the problem, it's really easy to think that we're all powerless in the face of these large problems, like the migration crisis, like climate change. But actually, I think it's really important that we all remember that we're very powerful in the way that we treat each other, and especially in the small acts, that we're especially powerful.
And the book, The Bicycle, as I said, it's a children's book. It's out Thursday. What do you hope it'll achieve?
I hope that people remember that even the smallest of acts have the biggest consequences, and you never know what it is that might actually stay with someone for that long.
Mim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. So to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, we'll talk all things AI as world leaders gather in Paris for what's become, of course, a key geopolitical issue.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months. Why have we agreed to this? Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted. She was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Breaking news this morning, and the parents of 2 of the young girls killed in the Southport attack have spoken about their ordeal on camera for the first time. 7-year-old Elsie Stankham, 6-year-old BB King and 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguiar were killed at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport back in July. It was an attack that shocked the country. And now the parents of Elsie and BB have spoken to ITV's Good Morning Britain and say they welcome the public inquiry announced by the Prime Minister. We can hear first from Jenny and David Stankham.
She was fearless in a sense.
Oh, she was so brave.
Yeah.
She was really, really brave.
Our house is such a happy house. Every morning we shout to each other, go, "Good morning," and it's the way that we wake up every morning. And we always say we try our best today, we be our best, and you're better, aren't you?
But
affirmations.
Yeah, she loved it. She encouraged it, and she would be like, "Yeah, come on," and that was just her enthusiasm every day. It was just that was Elsie.
If you saw the impact she'd had on others, you know, whether that be a cheer team at the school, her friends, or family friends, or family.
Elsie was like the glue of the family. She really was, and she was just, yeah, special.
But if we hadn't been there, it wouldn't have happened. I might not be here, but I would never have let that happen.
You'd fight to the death for your children, wouldn't you?
Yeah. 100%. God, I'd swap with Elsie any day. Yeah. I think there's an element of accountability. So if somebody's made a decision that has resulted in an element of failure, then there needs to be accountability for that. And I believe that the announcement of the inquiry will do that, and it will hold people to account for some of the decisions that they've made.
At the time, I didn't know what Prevent was, but, you know, since now I know he's had encounters with them. So it's, yeah, it goes without saying, but not. He's obviously come into contact with these services, and, you know, it doesn't bring Elsie back, does it? So.
But we hope that the change does come off the back of it.
And no one else should ever go through something like this. Like, if it was that obvious that he'd been flagged up so many times, like, what? Like, yeah.
Oh, I'd hate for anyone to go through this.
They'd find an answer to it, to, you know, iron out the flaws that's already in these services that we look into, all these people that get flagged up.
Jenny and David Stankham there speaking to Susanna Reid on Good Morning Britain, and Matthew Thompson is here to discuss some of this with us. Matthew, first and foremost, the most striking thing, the bravery of the parents to come out and speak like that, and we saw a glimpse of it. It was deeply, deeply moving.
Yeah, raw and emotional, and I mean, it's very hard to watch that and not feel yourself getting choked up. I mean, it was watching it actually on Good Morning Britain. Both presenters Susanna Reid and Ed Balls really were quite struggling to present it, and I think that says something about the, as I say, the rawness of the emotion. But in some ways, I'm just amazed that they're able to do those interviews. You know, the parents so soon. I mean, this was only last summer that this happened, and it is quite extraordinary that they're functional at all in some ways. And I think listening to that, and also the interview that B.B. King's parents did, was deeply, deeply moving when they talked about some of the reasons why they're doing it. And B.B. King's parents certainly saying that they were doing it because they felt there'd been so much of the awfulness had been covered through the recent trial, and they wanted people to forget about that and remember their words and remember their memories of their daughter, who they described as being pure light and pure joy. And I thought that was a really moving and admirable motive, I suppose, for choosing to speak out now.
I mean, the other thing that really struck me was when Elsie's mother, Jenny, said, you know, she'd do anything to swap places with her 7-year-old daughter today, which I just think brings the horror of it all home.
Yeah.
As you said, you know, why now? Why are they being so brave as they are now? And it was interesting to hear Jenny and David Stankham's reflection there on the actions that the government has announced, which I don't think it's praise per se, but it was positive conclusion towards the fact that this inquiry is going to happen, and hopefully, you know, lead to changes that prevent this again.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the second main reason that they have spoken out, both sets of families, is obviously to recognise and acknowledge the plans for this public inquiry, but also, and one of the things their lawyer has said, is that they're very keen to shape the public inquiry and make sure that they have a role in deciding what questions it should answer and what it should look for. Obviously, for people who might need a reminder of this, one of the key reasons there needs to be an inquiry is that as it came out during the trial, there seemed to have been multiple occasions when the murderer Axel Rudakabana was in contact, shall we say, with authorities. There were referrals to prevent the Home Office's radicalisation programme and various other contacts with various social services. And yet no one picked up that this was a potentially homicidal person. And so there are several failings that need to be addressed, and that's certainly what the public inquiry should do. But one of the things that the parents are very keen to stress is that they're very glad it's happening, but they want to be at the heart of sort of setting its parameters.
Matthew, as always, thanks so much. Now, world leaders, tech executives, academics and other experts are gathering in Paris for 2 days of talks on the progress and potential of artificial intelligence as it increasingly becomes a key geopolitical issue. US Vice President J.D. Vance is attending, having landed in the last couple of hours. It's his first trip abroad since taking office. China's President Xi Jinping has sent his special envoy, demonstrating how high the stakes are for the meeting. Well, head of AI at the Institute for Public Policy Research, Carsten Jung, is also there. He joins us now from the summit. Thanks so much for joining us, Carsten. What is the significance of this gathering in Paris? I think we need to get your mic back, Carsten. Forgive us. Let's just reconnect that. And
Sorry.
I think it's our end.
There we go.
We've got you now. We've got you now. Crack on again. Start again.
Apologies. This is actually quite a new type of summit, right? So only since the UK started this in 2023 do we have international AI summits. And what they're initially set up to do was AI safety, because we see these really rapid improvements of models that can increasingly do dangerous things, including helping people make dangerous viruses, helping people crack IT systems. And one of the core targets of these summits is to come to international agreement on keeping models safe. And there will be some progress made here. Actually, there could have been more ambition given how good AI has become. But it's great to have this international process. Secondly, it will be important for the French government, something that they have put at the center of this, is to build public AI, so infrastructure for AI that isn't run by only the big tech companies, which are currently utterly dominating the space, but have more public, transparent, non-profit ways of running AI. And that's a real big new emphasis that the French government is giving this.
That's really interesting. So it's not top of the agenda to attract as much investment and scale for domestic industry as possible?
No, it is. And, there is definitely a global arms race going on. So the US has announced a $500 billion investment. France has announced a €100 billion investment over the next years. The UK has its own AI opportunities action plan. So there is a global arms race going on. I think what's missing is actually not the ambition to lead on AI or develop it very quickly, but to put more guardrails around it of how we actually want to deploy it. So one illustrative example is that in the UK, there's about 1 million people who have AI companions, AI friends. And there's some evidence that these are increasingly addictive, because they're trained in a way to make it really sticky and keep people's attention. And there are these new types of challenges coming up from AI, which are sometimes forgotten in the global race to invest. And this AI summit is really an opportunity for the public to pay more attention and us starting a debate on what we actually want from AI and what the risks are, and really demanding this from politicians.
What is the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge will be to put in place policies that make sure we get good kinds of AI. So at the moment, we have chatbots that actually are mostly used by businesses, and that could lead, and we have a report out last week, to about 7 out of 10 knowledge tasks being affected by AI in some way. And if we just sort of push this out into the market and hope for the best, then we might get quite significant labor market disruption, and we might not get the good things, such as AI in health that helps prevent diseases. And our frameworks are still, this is a very new technology, and the speed of it coming online is dizzying. But we haven't got the frameworks in place, the mission-based frameworks, as we would call it at IPPR, to steer AI in a good direction. And I'm worried that over the next years, we will get some not so positive effects. And so the public debate really needs to catch up.
Carsten Jung, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, sailing success in Sydney, we talked to Team GB after their Sail GP win.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. It's been a successful weekend for Great Britain on the water, with Sir Ben Ainsley's Sail GP team getting their first win of the season on the Sydney Harbour. The team's driver, Dylan Fletcher, joins me now. Thanks so much for joining us, Dylan. Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
So break down for us what this particular competition is and the significance of it.
Yeah, Sail GP is this sort of global league that's really taking sailing to the next level. And
for us to come away with our first win of the season is fantastic. 3 events, 3 podiums. So, yeah, we're in a very good spot.
And we described this as Sir Ben Ainsley's team. Just, again, to people that don't understand the details of the sport, what do we mean by that? Because he wasn't, in fact, sailing, and you're, in fact, the driver.
Yeah, so I guess Ben's one of the owners of the team, and he's the CEO of the team running it. So I guess he brought me in at the end of last year to become the driver, and yeah, it's great to be part of it. And Ben, obviously sailing with him last summer in Barcelona, I learned a lot from him, and he's got a lot of experience here. So he helped out over the weekend and made this victory.
And what comes next in terms of the rest of the season ahead? It runs for how long? How many other races are there?
Yeah, so we're 3 events in. We've been to Dubai, Auckland, and Sydney. There's 10 more events to go, and so we're racing in LA and then San Francisco. We've got Rio, so it's a full sort of calendar. I guess the highlight for us is going to be we've got a home event in Portsmouth in the middle of July. And so we're hoping to bring, some big crowds down there and get some home support. But it's really sort of breaking boundaries, sailing the SailGP circuit, and it's sort of sailing like you don't know it.
And how much has there been a growth in fans following the sport over the last decade or so?
I think that with the advancement in technology and having the sort of shorter race course, it's really been fantastic for sailing to be able to, for us to showcase it and bring these new fans who, aren't the typical sailors. And I guess that we're also showing that sailors aren't all these sort of yachties and the typical stereotypes. We've got fast action pace, we've got crashes, we've got it all.
Crashes, which I presume are rather expensive.
Yeah, we certainly do. We do try to avoid them. The German team and the Americans and the Brazilians picked up some difficult penalty points and some costly mistakes on the Friday in practice. It's certainly something that we all try to avoid, but it's ultimately inevitable in high-level sport.
I meant more these boats are incredibly expensive, are they not?
I guess they are, sort of expensive, but they're all one design. They're all made the same. Some of the boats are probably coming up to 10 years old. So, rather than replacing the boat or whatever car every year, these boats are 10 years old. So they're really, the cost isn't actually that high considering sort of the usage and how many hours we get on the water with them.
And what is the ultimate aim with this competition? As you said, it's a sort of new competition. There's private ownership of the teams. Will it surpass the significance of the America's Cup, for example, one day?
I guess it's something we'll see in the future. But for me personally, I think they're 2 very different circuits. The America's Cup is steeped in history. It's one of the oldest sporting trophies, and it's got so much legacy with it. And ultimately, I guess the SailGP is sort of new. It's fast and exciting, and we're trying to generate that new fan base. We travelled in the entire world. We're going to 13 different countries this time, and I think that it's really important. It's really important for sailing to have those different competitions. So, having competed in the America's Cup and SailGP, I think they both have their place ultimately, and hopefully, they both sort of feed off each other in fueling more and more fans and people to watch our fantastic sport.
Dylan Fletcher, thanks so much for joining us. Congrats on the win.
Thanks.
Safe onward travels as well with that busy schedule. Right, a couple minutes left on the programme. Let's get you up to speed on all of the day's politics before we leave you. Mari's back with that. So, Mari, I guess the immediate next focus today is going to be this building farmers' protest in Westminster. We heard from Nigel Farage already, I guess, in North London before the tractors make their way into central London. It doesn't sound like this is escalating in an aggressive way. And the farmers, it's interesting to hear Farage say this, but encouraging the farmers to keep it peaceful, keep it respectful, and actually almost like the number one priority is keeping people on side, not taking action that would force the government's hand.
Absolutely. I think they are very aware that they need to keep the public on side in order to have any chance of changing the government's mind. They feel that actually being seen in a positive light by the public will make them more sympathetic to their cause, will then potentially put more pressure on the government if people are sympathetic to the farmers, instead of people going on strike, setting fire to cars or whatever it might be. He was trying to say, we're not like France, as it were. The France can be often more militant when it comes to their protest, historically speaking. And what he was trying to say was actually that's not going to help the cause. And that's really because actually the UK government doesn't look like it's willing to budge on this, and therefore the last thing they want is to give them any kind of ammunition against the farmers by saying, look what they've done, look what the place they've smashed up the place, or they've burnt this down, or whatever, and then turning them into the villains. And so this is very much about politics in terms of image and optics. It's hugely important, isn't it?
What's also really interesting is that Dan Whitehead at a farm in Wiltshire, or the guests we had in studio, two farmers also saying loud and clear, particularly targeting Nigel Farage, is we don't want a US trade deal, kind of highlighting the balance in who they see as their main supporters. Now, the interesting thing for me on that is we had the chair of the Conservative Party on earlier, and he said he didn't know if Kemi Badenoch was going to be addressing this gathering today. You feel like that's an area where she could try and seize the narrative a little bit. And she, of course, famously didn't attend or address in person from the stage at one of the earlier farmers' protests.
Yeah, this has often been the criticism of Kemi Badenoch, is how much media does she want to do? How good is she at kind of capturing that moment and making that headline, or getting photographed in the right place at the right time? Is she good at that? And often the criticism is she's not very good at that. I think on the trade deal aspect, there is still a lot of anger from farmers around the Australian trade deal, and that was done by when Liz Truss was in power. And so I think there's a frustration that more and more trade deals are going to make it harder for farmers, while, yes, boosting the economy, but making their lives much, much harder, and they're really worried about that.
Mari, great stuff, as always. Thanks so much for that. Well, of course, Sky News will have all of the latest from that farmers' protest throughout the morning and building up until lunchtime here. But up next on Sky News Today with Gareth Barlow, the very latest reaction to the testimony of the parents of the victims of the Southport attacks.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.